Going back to the past a bit. 30 years ago at the residence of the Iris family. At that time the elves were all hot girls. Dressed coolly in the middle of the green forest. A blushing girl said, UHM. A few elf girls looked shyly at the person in front of them and said, Andrew, are you really going to leave us behind? Another girl with 2 red round hairpins on her head also said, Why don't you stay? Hear a little more. A pair of black-booted feet stomping on the grass said, I am truly grateful for this generosity. My elves, thank you for your hospitality these past few days. I have learned a lot of things. The man with brown hair, 1 earring, smiled and winked at the goblins and said, However, I still need to continue my research in real society. Even if it's difficult, but I can't put it off any longer. I hope everyone will understand. The other person is Order of Truth first-class researcher, Andrew Russell. Andrew has a handsome face. He's handsome. I don't know if that smile has captivated countless goblins. He blinked at the girls. Don't worry, no matter how long it takes. I won't forget your beauty. Quote. He reached out and grabbed a girl's chin and lifted it up, startling the other girl. Andrew looked at the girl with 2 red pigtails and said, It's truly a nostalgia if I could see such a lovely face every time I wanted. If I could, I would have experienced a memorable memory with you. The girl with 2 red buns trembled and said, Oh my God, Andrew is not here, everyone is looking. At this time, a familiar voice said, Okay, don't bother my guests anymore. When the other female goblins saw Doris coming, they immediately swung their legs and ran away saying, It's a saint, run away, you don't want to get scolded. Andrew looked up at Doris and called out, Miss Doris. Doris stood among the goblin maids and said, Hello human boy. Andrew said, Well, I owe you a goodbye. Pretty lady, have you just finished prophesying? Doris looked at Andrew and said, After all, it's an important prophecy about my family's destiny. It's okay, the benefit of being an elf is having an infinitely long lifespan. Quote. Doris picked up the glass of water and took a sip. She said a little shyly, In order to receive your blessing, I must receive a sign from her or the subject she desires. If so, I need more information. Andrew heard that and was silent. After a while he said, I will try to ask real society to help you. Everything has changed but the truth will always be the same. Andrew put his hand on his chest. I promise to say, about 200 years. Not at most 100 years. I will hold a very important position in real society. When that happens, even if no one helps you, I will definitely. But before Andrew finished promising, a hand placed on his head gently rubbed it, making Andrew blush. Doris's voice came from above his head. Doris said, Thank you my little guest. Quote. Andrew patted his head and trembled shyly. Doris said, People often think elves are a proud race and don't want to bother other species. Doris said with a bright smile. But what they don't know is that our long lives make us appreciate the things that are important to us even more. It's just a few things to remember. Andrew covered his chest and thought, I know that's why you don't remember. Doris said with a grin. How nostalgic. You were only that tall the last time I touched that hair. Andrew said embarrassedly, It's been so many years then that. Don't talk like I'm a child. Doris smiled and said, If you want me to not see you as a guest or a child, then give me a reason. She leaned closer to Andrew and said, This time I will keep it deep inside my memory. My guest, do you want to say your name in front of an elf? Andrew raised his voice and said, My name is. Human. The other side of the phone wondered and called out, Andrew. The uncle on this side had the same face as Andrew when he was a young man. The only difference was that he was older and one eye still wore a pair of glasses. He is the vice president of Realistic Society, Andrew Russell. Andrew said to the other person, It's been a while. Mom. Nuo-jin is the center of Korean Realistic Society. Where the symbol of a dragon skeleton is, there are 2 people standing guard. Inside the room, a bald person, with a big belly, and a mustache is sitting opposite a gray-haired person. In the middle is a chessboard. The 2 of them play chess with each other. One side is black and the other. On the white side, the gray-haired man moved the pawn and said, How could anyone think that the Iris family would show up after a few hundred years? The gray-haired man was Walter Leonard, chief of alchemy of the Order of Truth. Walter Leonard. He glanced outside and said, The person you liked when you were young suddenly appeared. Right, it's too bad that that person is now an old man. In the end you still can't have the woman you truly love. The man sitting opposite with a mustache sighed and said, "Please be careful of that funding cut. Your vice president is a worthy man among the noble women in the downtown area." Walter Leonard continued, "It's been 300 years. Who knows is whether that guy has a change of heart or not." The bald old man with a big belly said, "Let's put that aside. Recently someone has taken on the mission of hunting wild. It seems like I'm about to have to spend more money. He was the Order of Truth's chief of mechanics. Lowell Fitch." Walter Leonard said, startled, "What? Who took the wild wanted mission? That's strange. Who really accepting it? He must have lived more than 200 years. He is a destruction-level magician. Who would try to commit suicide?" Lowell Fitch smiled, "That's quite good. Dare come out of your weird laboratory." Lowell Fitch released a few spiders from his sleeve with a talking machine. It's not surprising that someone claimed it. After all, the extermination devils and protecting civilians are also the duties of the Radiant Knight of the Secret Tower. Lowell Fitch said with a very worried voice. "And as you said, he is a destruction-level enemy. Not only is he invisible, who would dare to face him without having destruction-level strength? Don't you think even his greatest enemy would accept this mission?" Walter Leonard touched his chin and concluded, "That's right. If something goes wrong they will be in trouble again. And those who lack money if they are only at the destruction level. So that means is there a destroyer subordinate who is short of money? People at the destruction level are short of money. Joseph is on the other side with Claude and Sneezers." Lowell Fitch said, "Anyway, the budget for each department is quite tight. Because of that wanted sir, your troublesome research is about to be delayed." Walter Leonard shouted back, "If mine is a problem then your mechanical project is a waste. If he doesn't learn how to make automatic hair washers, he'll be super short of money. At the end of the day, only the people who invaded the secret tower will buy that. Honestly, the president should renegotiate the budget for it." Quote, Lowell Fitch remembered his subordinate saying, "That is all the wise work of my subordinates Mr. Hanson Gorsh. I have paused that to respond to it for you. Which I surely he will be willing to invite you to meet when he has a new product." Walter Leonard put his hand on his mouth and coughed a few times and said, "No need. Let's continue our match." He looked down at the chessboard. Then he glanced at Lowell Fitch a little angrily and said, "Dear Fitch. To think that you are trying to distract me and then cheat." Lowell Fitch smiled shyly, "Even though you wrongly accused me, you're still my best friend." Walter Leonard moved the pieces and smiled and said, "Anyone can make friends. If they have money, that's wrong, heartless and greedy." Lowell Fitch said, "Oh my God. Leonard, you're wrong, but I must say that my research is very useful." Lowell Fitch happily said, "That clay idol plan is the final step. All thanks to Miss Doris's help. The Philosopher's Stone from the Eternal Coffin is extremely terrible. More than anything my alchemy can create." Walter Leonard turned his ear and said, "Immediately complete the final step. I hear I've done that 1,000,000,000 times, but every time everyone reports failure and asks for more funding after a few weeks. Sometimes I wonder if it's your ploy to get more money." Lowell Fitch shouted at Walter Leonard, "That's because the Philosopher's Stone isn't pure enough." Walter Leonard argued back, "Stop arguing. It's because of your poor performance." The two old men looked at each other. Their eyes flashed with lightning. Then they both arrogantly turned their heads away. After a moment of silence, Walter Leonard said, "You still haven't told me who took the wanted mission wild. That destruction level character that's been boring lately." Lowell Fitch said, "I know you won't guess. This time it's not a destroyer but a petrified hunter." Outside the sky was raining. A sword pierced the monster's head. The monster's blood flowed out and mixed with the rain. A figure carrying a long sword on his back, with a gun on it. One hand walked past the monster corpses. The other whispered, "Where is it?" The young man wore a veil, covering the lower half of his face, revealing only his eyes and platinum hair. He could faintly see a long scar above his eye. He held a gun in his hand, fired a shot. The sound echoed to the ground. The young man said, "Just now." The young man put the gun in his pocket and walked away. At this time a monster stood high above observing the young man. Then it used its claws to attack the young man's back. The young man seemed to grow behind him. He opened his eyes wide and said, "Oh, I see." Then the young man very quickly pulled out the sword from behind him and slashed half of the monster's body. The young man put the sword behind his back, took out the paper, read it, and said, "Once I finish, I will level up to destroy." The young man stared at the notice with Wild's picture. Then he opened his eyes wide and said, The black-scaled faceless man is also good. A deal for destruction. On this side of the chessboard the white and black pieces are still moving. Lowell Fitch said, "That's right. The hunter who rules the night. Burton Ackerman wants to use Wild's bounty as an achievement for himself. In the standard test, he reached the destruction level after infecting himself with poisonous blood. That's why he was accepted." Walter Leonard said, a little bewildered, "So, but if he can really find..." At this moment a voice rang out, "What are you two talking about?" Andrew put on his coat and walked towards them. The other two called out, "Vice President." Andrew walked to the chair in the middle of the table. Lowell Fitch said, "Vice President, you've taken care of the problem already." Even though Andrew is old, he still can't give up his complacent habit. He stroked his head coolly and said, "Don't worry, I just didn't expect that it's been 300 years and I'm quite old. But she still remembers me. Not only that, but the way she talks is still the same." Andrew said nostalgically, "It's like I'm dreaming." Andrew thought silently, and the other two looked at Andrew. They both had the same thought. Maybe it's sadness after seeing my crush. Ms. Doris is an elf. Right, she's a long-lived species. Of course she doesn't change. So what's the point? Besides that, I don't think when you were like that at that time. But because of the budget, we shouldn't say anything. Walter Leonard raised his voice and asked, "Vice President, what is the name? How is the book? Did Iris's family ask to serve him as master?" Andrew covered his face and thought. "Ask him to say it's not him. It's not him. The secret tower has sent the file for me to look at." Andrew took out a piece of paper and held it up in front of them all. The man surprised them. After sitting down on the chair, Andrew said, "Oh, and Leonard, management has decided to cut your budget by 3% from next month." Walter Leonard heard the tears flowing in 2 lines and shouted, "What?" Andrew put his hands on his hands and said, "I can't believe Nuo Jin has someone at that level. It's like Joseph wrote this himself. So I can't help it." Walter Leonard lay on the chessboard crying, and Lowell Fitch patted his shoulder to comfort him. Andrew continued, "Because they are friendly so we don't need to investigate quickly. But it's still very troublesome to have someone like that here in Nuo Jin." Walter Leonard stopped crying along with Lowell Fitch and turned to look Andrew. Walter Leonard said, "What do you mean?" Andrew put on his cloak and stood up and said, "Wild is also involved in this bookstore. And Ackerman too. Keep an eye on him." Walter Leonard said, "It would be very dangerous to let someone at that level. Indescribable existence." Lowell Fitch also said, "We should be careful." Andrew said, "Now I have to prioritize creating mirror magic first. That's why I let Ackerman go, it's the best." Andrew turned and left and said, "I don't deny that I'm using him. But I should find out what the bookstore owner has in mind. That's not enough to call him a friendly. I can't lose the trust of millions of residents in Nuo Jin. This incident will make me more perfect." Andrew stepped out onto the balcony, looked at the cactus in front of him and whispered, "What are we really doing? The purpose of real society is only to gain knowledge and also maintain order." Andrew's face sank into darkness. He turned his head to look at the other two and said, "But every time an organization, if I have too much authority and too much ability, I will destroy it from the inside." Walter Leonard said a little bewilderedly, "What do you mean?" Lowell Fitch also said that there is corruption in real society. Andrew said, "It's no wonder my surveillance failed. It has let the Red Sect and the White Wolves escape countless times, and still escapes. If we don't take care of it, then society, the reality society, will be in immediate danger." Andrew's eyes were very serious. "That's a price I can't bear." "I know it's you too." The other two heard the call and were a bit startled. Himself, Andrew continued, "That real society lacks a central monitoring system. So I hope you two can provide it. That's what President Maria needs." Andrew rested his hands on the railing, turned around to look at the giant skeleton and said, "If she hadn't fought a K-level guy, she would have given it to you too. So that's what I'll do. Let Ackerman, let's try it first. If there is, we don't need to be afraid of the indescribable name." Andrew said very seriously, "Even if God dies, the truth is still there." Two people, Walter Leonard and Lowell Fitch, were silent when they heard that. The two of them stood behind Andrew and looked at the skeleton. Andrew said, "The truth is eternal." At this time on 23rd Street, the neighbor near Lynn G's house broadcasted the news again. Last night the gas explosion between 21st and 23rd Streets caused many casualties. based on experts due to the bad weather and lack of equipment. Lightning caused many explosions, and the fire spread and burned down many houses. Lin Ji had just woken up. He was yawning, walking down the stairs. The announcer's voice on TV was still playing. Luckily, the firefighters arrived in time and started the rescue. The fire stopped right at 23rd Street and the road was blocked. The left side was full of houses. The house is fine while the right side is all damaged. Lin Ji heard the news and was startled. Road 23. He quickly walked out the door thinking, "Isn't that my place?" Lin Ji quickly pushed the door open to look outside. He saw that right in front of his shop. The ground had collapsed and right in front of his shop. He was startled and said, "I was just sleeping a little. But suddenly this happened. Is that so?" Lin Ji was very confused and thought to herself, "I slept quite deeply. Even an explosion couldn't wake me up. I don't think anything else happened. Other than her buying 30 books and chasing after people. Seems to be migrating. And now there's an explosion outside. This life is so strange sometimes." Lin Ji smiled to console herself and said, "Luckily it stopped right in front of the house." Thought about it some Doris book buyer. Lin Ji looked into the room and looked at the potted plant that had just sprouted. Thinking, she begged me to put the potted plant before she left and said she couldn't just accept it from me. Okay, she said too much. She even replied back, "So embarrassing." Lin Ji smiled shyly and thought, based on that, it seems like the seed is quite valuable. Lin Ji thought of her when the girl Doris talked to him about the effect of the tree when growing. He thought to himself, what does it have in mind, and then also fulfill wishes like some tricks to attract young girls. She is also very easy. She still believes in things like that. But then again, she's not that old yet and has a heart like that. Lin Ji watered the seedling and thought to herself, one when it grows up, it will be very beautiful. I hope it will help improve the store's perspective. Lin Ji smiled happily and said, that's really interesting. I hope it will grow up to be beautiful. Really happy. Lin Ji watered the other seedling without noticing that underneath the foliage there was a pair of eyes staring at Lin Ji. A week later, the seedling that Doris gave to Lin Ji has now blossomed into a very famous rose. Beautiful, a sparkling red rose with leaves surrounding it. Lin Ji looked at the rose very happily and thought, oh my god, my week of care has paid off. That seed has also grown. It's blooming. It's great. It's really beautiful. Lin Ji smiled without seeing her eyes and thought, I've always wanted to grow my own flowers. But they never live long. So it's a success. Star. For a while happily, Lin Ji put 2 fingers on his chin and looked at the rose very thoughtfully. He thought, but isn't it a bit strange that it's only been a week since the flowers bloomed? And the roses are growing. According to the bush, why does it only have 1 flower? Lin Ji thought about what Doris once said. He thought, but since Ms. Doris said it was a rare breed, it must have special abilities. Right? Lin Ji smiled again with her eyes narrowed. Besides, she never said it was a rose. It could be some kind of rose similar to a rose. Right? The flower grows quickly and is easy to raise. Yes, maybe it's those points that even I can raise. Lin Ji looked at the blooming roses and said with a bright smile, now let's show my customers your beauty. Decorate something like that. This at the store will definitely help customers have a better mood. And they will buy more books. Lin Ji placed the rose on the table right in front of where he usually sat. Lin Ji propped his hands on the table and said, as the old saying goes, details are important. Okay, it's time to open the door. The rose was placed parallel to the statue on the table. Lin Ji yawned, tears forming in the corners of her eyes. Silently said, it's very lonely without anyone to talk to. I wonder if I'll be able to heal anyone today. That rose. Behind the layers of flowers there is a pair of eyes staring at Lin Ji's steps. And outside it is still raining and shows no signs of stopping. One person is holding it in his hand, black handbag, walking in the rain. The other person wearing black boots stepping on the rain said, 23rd Street. A small bookstore. He lit a cigarette. The smoke drifted. With a straight back with silver hair. He stood in front of the bookstore and said, is this the place? The exterior doesn't seem too friendly. Or has the owner never thought about selling books? He took off the mask and saw that his wrinkled face and jagged beard was an uncle. His face had a long scar extending to his cheek. That person was the person who killed the monster the day before. He said, it looks like he's trying to make it more desolate. And he was. Burton Ackerman, the Pale Watchman, destructive rank hunter. Burton closed his eyes and said, now that you mention it. It seems quite on purpose. Right, let's see if a hunter's scent recognition ability can tell anything. After closing his eyes to smell, Burton realized that there was a familiar aura that belonged to Wild. Burton said, RC. Even though it's been a while, there are still some signs left in the rain. It's a sign from Wild. Right. Burton stood in the rain and smiled and said, it's not that bad. Indeed, the black-scaled faceless man has quite good skills. So, the source of that charisma comes from the spirit object. There, the spirit that Burton was talking about was the monster statue in that store. Burton thought, but it doesn't seem too strong. Using it to guard the door wouldn't be bad. If there was a difference. When the people come, it's quite difficult for them. Isn't it? Burton held a cigarette in his mouth and said, the charisma seems even more obvious than other places. He thought, it seems like a realistic society, that's right. Wild must have used this place as his headquarters. Though it seems to be a temporary residence. Based on their information, Wild visited here twice. Based on other indications, he seems to come here more often. Around where Burton stood there were familiar red and blue auras hovering. He thought, if that's the case then Wild will definitely come back. Burton looked up at the sky, and I will have the opportunity to confront him. The reason real society has not yet acted is because of this. Burton dropped the bag hard on the ground, causing the little mouse to startle. He thought, but the rats of the White Wolves and that red sect have made him too busy. I still have. You can smell the scent of magic smoke and blood from the previous battle. Burton opened his bag and rummaged through a few things. He took off his wet shirt and replaced it with a new one. He said, not only do they already taking care of the consequences and also moving everyone here. The secret tower and real society are too experienced to cover this up. But it still bothers them. Right. Burton buttoned his shirt and said, now Murphy is dead and the fate of those rats has been decided. Burton smiled. Do as you wish. I hope she will understand. To be where she made her mistake before she died. Burton put on his raincoat, his face showing a contemptuous smile, even though it was unfortunate to encounter a sage elf who came by real society. But even if Doris wasn't here, they would still fail. He thought to himself, this magical mirror birth is really so powerful that people will lose their awareness. Anyway, a hunter shouldn't be too curious like that. It'll be fine. Burton wore a raincoat and stood under the rain, his thoughts running wild. Now my mission is to wait for the prey so I can receive the destruction level. Burton's hand loosened on one side and then clenched it tightly. Thought to myself, listen, the most important thing for a hunter is caution and patience. That's what my senior taught me. Even though this bookstore doesn't have any signs so I don't have to be too careful. Burton stared at the bookstore in front of him, thinking, my goal will be to pretend to be a regular customer and then talk normally. Burton threw his cigarette on the ground, left his bag outside, and walked towards the store. Book. Burton walked and thought to himself, can't be bothered. On the shop sign hung the word open. Burton without hesitation raised his hand to push open the bookstore door. The bell on the door jingled. The light from outside flooded into the bookstore. Burton walked in. His eyes saw something. His eyes narrowed and thought, that's exactly what I thought. Burton looked at Lynn G with the monster statue, and the rose tree next to him, thinking, this bookstore is not nothing special. I don't even see anything supernatural. Oh, so that's Wild's, isn't it? It's really a meticulously made item. So if I don't have bad intentions then it'll be fine. Right, I'm quite confident in my disguise skills. Burton smiled politely, even though it's a destructive level. I can't doubt anything until I attack. Now I need to take care of the bookstore chain. Burton looked at Lynn G, who was sitting there leisurely, thinking, even though he is a normal person, he can still be an enemy. The information was chosen by Wild. At this moment, Lynn G smiled brightly, looking at Burton and saying, welcome. He thought to himself, here it is. New customers. It's been a long time. There are no new customers, as if there were no customers at all. Even if there are days like that. It's not bad. But who doesn't want to speak healing words and make money? Lynn G, a money-hungry young man of the new society, thought. No one came to my store even though there was a crowd after the explosion. It seems like it's time to renovate the bookstore. The circle of Lynn G's bookstore is no change. Otherwise it doesn't attract customers. Otherwise there's no work. Otherwise there's no money. Otherwise there's no change. It's a loop. Lynn G put her hands on her hands and eyes brightly thinking, that's why I can't lose money or customers anymore. Even though I don't have much, I can still use my speaking skills to increase my number. Quantity. Lynn G looked at Burton hanging his raincoat over there and thought, I'm so excited to show off my speaking skills. Lynn G opened her mouth and said, are you planning to borrow, find or buy the book? If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask me. Burton said, just looking for books. He thought to himself, this can't be the answer that will suit every wanderer who hears that news. Burton, I felt like I was acting very well and thought to myself, how can I act well? I just have to go around and get it done. Burton smiled victoriously. Besides, there's nothing good here. Quote. Suddenly Burton's eyes opened wide. He saw something. He was startled, only to see Burton staring at the rose on the table a bit startled. Burton's sweat dropped and thought to himself, rose? It's quite beautiful, so it must be very expensive. It's something worth noting here. But it's just a rose. It won't be worth anything. But the rose tree in the pot is there. Suddenly trembled a few times. Then an eye poked out from deep inside the flower. That eye stared at Burton, startling Burton. Burton's eyes opened wide. He did not move but stood still in place. I thought to myself, what? I can't move. What is that flower taking from my soul? It turned out that it wasn't that Burton wanted to stand still. It was because that rose did something that made Burton unable to move. Burton's sweat fell all over his face as he thought, is it a trap? Or am I being caught? How can that be? I can't find any magical fluctuations. At this moment, Lynn G spoke up, interrupting Burton's thoughts and saying, if you want to ask, just ask, and find a book, as you wish. Lynn G gave a very friendly and normal smile. But Burton was shocked after hearing this. He rolled his eyes and thought, what's the point of searching? How can I search as I please? I can't even go. That's right, it was planned from the beginning. He noticed it. Those eyes were like looking at a trapped person. That smile full of enthusiasm when welcoming guests, but it was completely ironic to me. I thought he didn't know anything when I pretended to be normal and said I was looking for a book. Burton looked at Lynn G sitting over there with the rose and the monster statue exuding a strong and fierce aura. He thought, and this bookstore owner answered and searched as he wanted. It was too I see. He wants to see fear and hopelessness from someone like me. Isn't it obvious? Burton's eyes widened, looking at Lynn G sitting over there with a smile, drinking tea and scorning himself, silently asking in his heart, don't you want to look around? Then do it. I won't stop you, saying you can't go, it's my fault. He's definitely thinking of such a thing. Burton was furious. Blue veins appeared all over his face and she thought, I have never been humiliated like this. Death will be quick, but he doesn't want to destroy my entire existence. It's terrible. The eye in the rose stared at Burton, unable to move. Burton seemed to be frozen in place by an aura. Burton silently thought, but the most terrible thing is, if I feel like I'm being exposed, something that's being torn apart and feasted on from the depths of my soul. Burton's tears formed at the corners of his eyes. He was trembling all over, thinking, what is that? I don't really understand. My strength and awareness are still here, but I can't do anything. Chief. Burton trembled. His whole body felt like there were monsters eating him. He thought, this hopelessness won't be able to do anything. And it felt as if my body was dying, being eaten slowly. It's okay if I can't get it back. But the horror will still be like that until I die. No, I don't want that. Burton's face was covered in sweat. Tears still stuck to the corners of his eyes. Sweat fell to the floor. He thought to himself, why doesn't he kill me already? At least I will be released immediately. He is a brutal demon. It's my fault. I give up. I won't do it again. Can anyone save me? At this time, Lynn G noticed that Burton still didn't move. He looked up, looking at Burton with puzzled eyes. Lynn G raised her voice and asked, my customer, do you have something to ask? Didn't you say you were looking for books? Burton turned two eyes. One looked at the rose and the other looked at Lynn G. And Lynn G also noticed Burton's line of sight. He looked at the rose and then looked at Burton again. He seemed to understand something. He smiled, laughed and said, ah. Lynn G picked up the rose plant and held it in front of Burton, causing a certain flower plant to startle in confusion. Lynn G said, do you think it's beautiful? Lynn G thought, that's right. It's collected, having attracted customers. It seems to have paid off. As soon as Lin Ji picked up the pot of roses, Burton was able to move. He seemed to be freed and thought, I can go now. Burton loosened his grip. His hand was trembling. He smiled in his heart, so this is the feeling of being on the brink of death. Burton covered his face and smiled in the palm of his hand, thinking, the hopelessness. Shock and despair. Even though I screamed, I couldn't. Burton saw that the rose tree had countless eyes growing out of it, staring at him. But then it came back like nothing had ever happened. Burton smiled with a worried face. His whole body trembled and said, yes. The flower is very beautiful. Burton trembled. It was difficult to stand up straight. He thought, if I hadn't seen it deep inside, I would have thought if I was hallucinating and after being poisoned by blood. Burton leaned against the wall, his hand on the wall, thinking, anyway, it doesn't affect anything. That level of destruction, wild is fine. It's good to live. Burton leaned against the wall, breathing like he was alive again. Ackerman had completely lost the will to fight. Now he just wants to sit and think about the meaning of life. Burton trembled looking at the pot of roses and said, yeah. This flower is really beautiful. Lin Ji smiled back and said, thank you for the compliment me. I'm sure it's also very fun. Only Lin Ji is happy. But the flower that is rolling its eyes is not happy at all. Lin Ji thought to himself, he likes it. It means it's work, I've been rewarded. All creatures have souls. But it seems like flowers are romantic. Right? The key to earning income is to accumulate little by little. Exactly the details. Lin Ji thought at that moment. Doris smiled happily looking at him, he thought, and Doris reminded herself. Even though I only respected her because he still belonged to her, I could have done the important points. Lin Ji smiled blindly and thought to herself, if only she could see how if I cherish this flower, she will definitely be very happy. Right, when that happens, won't we have another guest? The other flower glanced at Lin Ji, who was smiling. She was very unhappy, and Lin Ji was still deep in thought that the flower was very happy and thought to himself. Besides, I also take care of it and water it every day. I care about it a lot. Lin Ji looked at the flower and smiled at the flower. But Burton stood and saw that scene. His whole body trembled even more intensely. He was bewildered. His face was frozen and he couldn't move. His eyes opened wide. His pupils shrank. What's going on? Not only is this shop owner laughing at everyone, but he's also close to that flower, looking at Lin Ji, smiling at the flower lovingly as if so he's very friendly. But the flower's eyes are not happy and are narrowed. Burton observed all this while thinking, he sees that monster as his own child. Even though there are dark mages like Murphy only respect dream beasts as perfect creatures. Even though they wouldn't treat them that way. Burton trembled and clenched his teeth. Unable to stop thinking, who the hell is this shop owner? Could it be? Burton looked at Lin Ji, the rose and the monster statue as if they were one. The black light surrounded all three. Burton seemed to have guessed his origin. Is he not human? What if he is like that rose and only has human skin? Burton came to the conclusion, that's right. The reason why I don't see any charisma. Why is his personality so unusual? Burton imagined Lin Ji sitting cross-legged on a chair over there. Around were the eyes staring at him, and the black aura hovering. He thought to himself, how is he so incredibly strong? Is it because he is a high-level creature? Thinking like that, Burton smiled, but his whole body was still trembling, and said to Lin Ji, I can see you put a lot of effort into taking care of it. And I'm just telling the truth. Burton imagined Lin Ji as a psychological manipulator. Thinking, that's right. Real society knows what's going on here. He forced me to say it. Oh my god. Real society. Burton's eyes widened and he thought, how could someone like Wild use this place to hide, rather than just coming here to trade? It's too dangerous. I'd better get out of here. Burton's hand loosened to one side, silently deciding, let's be natural. Right. Before we get noticed. While Lin Ji glanced at Burton very confused. He remained silent. Burton scratched his head with a shy smile and said, it's a bit late, and I'm also busy. So, before Burton finished speaking, Lin Ji interrupted him and said, this customer, why do you look so strange? Burton seemed to see that Lin Ji was very angry. He was startled and immediately trembled and said, no. Lin Ji now put his hand on the flower pot and said to Burton, I see you are a bit pale, or do you want to sleep a little? Lin Ji's words made Burton startled and tremble. Lin Ji held out his hand to Burton and said, I prepared that chair for him. It's very good for us to relax and talk. Why don't you sit and rest? Burton looked at the chair wrapped in light that blue light. His legs started to tremble. Burton looked at the chair and thought to himself, sit. Damn it, he knew I was going to run away. He was mad because I gave him such an unwarranted compliment. Why did he stop when I meant to leave? Because he was scared by his own thoughts. Burton smiled wryly and said to Lin Ji, no, I'm completely fine. Lin Ji put her hands on the table and said to Burton, is that so? Don't, is it forced? Lin Ji sighed in his heart thinking, he's so stubborn. Even though he looks tired he still doesn't want to tell everyone. In Lin Ji Burton's eyes he was now extremely tired and weak. He speculated, based on his appearance. He is exactly the type of office worker and somewhere around 35 years old. People like him have a boss and a wife. And they are reaching a midlife crisis. It's time to let him be threatened by the pressure. Lin Ji smiled as if he understood the source of the story. He thought to himself, not only is he aimless and confused. He is really worth fighting. Swing and even direct. To talk to customers like this, we need to lower their guard first. Came to a conclusion in her heart. Lin Ji immediately said, don't worry. Just sit down. Lin Ji stood up, looked at Burton in front of him and said, there's no one else here. Lin Ji's words in Burton's ear made Burton tremble even more. Lin Ji said, no one knows what happened here. Here. He placed a hand on his chest with a friendly smile and said, relax. Consider me your friend. If you have anything bothering you, please tell me. Lin Ji looked at Burton with very normal eyes. And a very friendly smile. With a calm voice saying, I'm quite good at opening people's hearts. But those actions in Burton's eyes and ears were a different image. Burton imagined that Lin Ji's eyes were rushing straight towards him, along with a devilish smile and a warning voice. Burton thought to himself, what do you mean by opening up? Burton hugged his arm thinking, it's a threat. Not so clear. Burton looked at Lin Ji and the two objects next to him as if they were emitting a black aura. He thought to himself, if I don't sit down and declare, I will encounter something else. He said it too clearly. Burton looked at his hand and thought, but I can't say everything. I have to ask, right? No, if I tell the truth. Burton imagined a story when he told the truth. Like now. Burton raised his voice and said, what's bothering me? Burton looked at Lin Ji and spoke loudly and warned, of course it's about me wanting to serve Wild here. But instead I was bothered by you again. Then Burton will see Lin Ji's face crack open with a warning voice saying, good job. Then Burton will see Lin Ji in a vest, turning into an octopus giant with toothed tentacles. Will jump out and bite him to death. Lin Ji's voice echoed, because it's annoying. Then let me open your heart. The white creature's tentacles, the giant multi-headed octopus attacked him. The octopus's cries were like demons whispering his name. Then Burton will be killed by those tentacles. Burton was scared out of his thoughts. He shed tears thinking, I will die like that. How can I say, if I do that I'll open my heart? While Lin Ji looked at Burton in a confused way. He said, it's my fault. I forgot you were still standing. Right. Lin Ji's words made Burton deep in thought. Man was startled. Lin Ji said to Burton, no need to be polite. Guest, please sit down. Burton looked at Lin Ji fearfully. Burton pursed his lips. Burton bowed his head thinking, damn it. Why do I feel like I'm going to be punished? But how can I resist? Burton accepted his fate and sat down on the chair in worry. Thinking, I want to cry. But if I am, then my career as a hunter will be over. No, I have to try. Burton sat down on the chair with a face full of worry and panic. In Lin Ji's eyes, he looked extremely sad. Lin Ji looked at Burton across from him and silently assessed. Achieving everything was already difficult from the beginning. Okay, if he's willing to sit and talk, then step 1 is done. Lin Ji put her chin on her hand and smiled brightly, thinking, so, I think it will be difficult to make someone like him care. Lin Ji licked her lips, imagining the meat of an oyster. He thought, but now I have to be careful. I need to be proactive, like opening an oyster slowly. I will only see the sweet part inside such a shell. Burton was even more scared when he saw Lin Ji licking his lips. He trembled for the 1000th time in one session. Oh my god. It's like he sees me as food. I better rest well. Before speaking, Burton came to a conclusion in his heart. then mustered all his courage and said, well, actually. Lin Ji opened his mouth to interrupt Burton, who was about to say, if you don't want to say it. That's fine, okay, let's see if it's because you're forcing it. Right? Lin Ji's words made Burton bewildered and opened his mouth wide. His pupils constricted. He was startled and thought, does he know I'm trying to level up destruction? Of course he does. I don't know, that's new. He knows everything and then doesn't even bother to do anything but talk. Burton's hand on his thigh clenched tightly. Thinking, what does he want? Lin Ji smiled and praised herself in her heart. I have the talent to talk. This is the time to say the words that heal the wound. The definition forced itself. It is a professional term used by Mr. Lin when there is a problem. It is about learning new skills. Or improving someone. They are all forcing themselves. If you think further, it is very comprehensive. In Lin Ji's eyes, he narrowed his eyes and looked at Burton in front of him. Thinking, it's obvious. He's lost his way, and in trouble, so this clause will suit him. Burton breathed out and thought, although I should say it anyway. There's no way I can hide it. After all, I'm only planning on leveling up to destruction. Burton closed his eyes tightly. His teeth gritted in an intense psychological struggle. How can I face such a terrible person? Because the source of the hunter's power is from the poisonous blood of the dream monster. Quote. Burton's sweat fell to the ground. He thought, it would be okay if dark magicians or scholars from real society would never consider me human. Burton raised his voice and said, I have given up. He began to tell his story. He remembered the faces in his thoughts. From Andrew to the knights. He said, that person is just using me as a tool. I already know. They say the system is fair. But they are looking down on us. Now Burton didn't have time to worry anymore. He thought about something else. He gritted his teeth and said, it's so clear that we are the source of their achievements and it's so unfair. Lin Ji heard that and said, I see. He thought in his heart, that's it. So he was exploited by his boss. He wanted to get promoted but his boss abused him. And that's when he realized he was just like a slave. Lin Ji imagined a story that the boss was a devil and was exploiting an ordinary person like Burton. Lin Ji thought, he was wandering around and then stopping here. He's not sick and it's understandable. Right. Lin Ji poured tea into the cup and sighed, sigh. Another salaryman. All I can say is, money is a luxury, right? Lin Ji pushed the other cup of tea towards Burton. Startling him, Lin Ji said, I understand your problem. Lin Ji held the teapot in her hand, looked at Burton, and said, this customer, mister, have you thought of another way? This time Burton was startled by Lin Ji's question. He thought, another way? What does he mean? Suddenly Burton realized something. He thought, what does he mean? It was just a normal word, but it was like a spark was lit inside me. Lin Ji said to Burton, now you are just a tool to them. Lin Ji sat down on the chair. He sat in a very relaxed position and said, are you willing to let them use you after finding out? Is it worth it? Lin Ji said with a serious face. They won't treat you well. They will harm you, and won't respect you at all. You're smart. I think you understand what I mean. Burton remained silent and did not answer. Burton gritted his teeth and thought, that's right. It's not worth it. Of course they can do that to me. It wouldn't be any good. The supernatural power of the worker hunting originates from the poisonous blood of dream monsters. Not only is the power borrowed, but it's also not good. It has no logic at all. Once you are hit by that power, you will become like a monster. Your humanity will gradually be destroyed. Lost. A few strong hunters became a dream monster with poisonous blood. When they lost their humanity, they destroyed countless things. Burton raised his hand and looked at his hand, thinking, I can't either. I can't blame them. Hunters have to risk doing those things. But even so, I'm still proud to be a hunter. Hunters will have to use their bodies and release nightmares into their souls along with poisonous blood to become my weapon. Burton looked at the drop of blood flowing on his palm and thought, every moonless night we hunt dangerous dream monsters and every battle is life or death. Time is short. Spirit knights, the succession of mages and the wisdom of scholars. But the soul of a hunter is not low compared to other mutants. For 30 years I have lived as a hunter. They are not what is it compared to a mutant my age. But I'm too much of a hunter. And about to collapse. My poisonous blood is from the pale man. My concentration is almost over. When if I use the power of poisonous blood, my humanity gradually disappears and my will becomes weaker and weaker. On rainy nights and hunting trips, When Burton finished dealing with the dream monsters, his arm gradually deformed. He knelt in the rain, looked at the pills in his hands, and said, "Medicine, I need it." He quickly drank the medicine without needing water to drink it. After finishing the medicine, his arm gradually returned to normal. He sat on the ground breathing heavily and said, "I have it back." Sadly, this strength from real society is gradually disappearing. I won't be able to maintain my humanity anymore. I have to do something. Burton thought to himself, in order to not despair anymore. I took on the mission to defeat Wild. I needed to use it as proof of my destructive level. But I realized I was wrong, and was only defeated by them. Taking advantage. Burton clenched his fists and gritted his teeth, thinking, what good is it when I serve? Even if I have a mandate, I still won't be respected. But if I don't make society real, where will I go? Burton sat still on the chair and said to Lynn with a hesitant voice, "I don't think I have another chance." Burton reached out to pick up the cup of tea on the table. His eyes filled with sadness said, I've been monitoring everything. If anything, I still have to depend on them. Lynn sympathized with Burton. He thought to himself, so this is a monopoly. This seems serious. If there is no good thing, that company is so bad it's not worth it. Right, but since he said he's considering other options, that also means he's wondering. If so, a few more suggestions would be fine. Lynn smiled and said, so do you think they are powerful people? He gave advice, I really can't leave. Why can't you find a suitable place? Burton remained silent without replying. Lynn held out her hand to him and said, think about it. What could happen in the future and the situation of others like you? I'm not the one to warn you. I hope you can make the choice you want to understand. Burton seemed to wake up from a dream. He shouted loudly, yes. He clenched his fist and said to Lynn you mean I need to choose my own path? Someone like us needs the power to take over the future. So that's a right, right? Burton's eyes lit up with a burning fire. He thought, right, since I'm separated from real society, I should take my own rights. Right, hunters can prove it themselves. What? Who will do it for me? Burton stood up. Behind him was a fire of enthusiasm. Lynn looked at the fire of enthusiasm burning behind Burton. He thought, he's really quite inspired. Isn't he? Opened his eyes and was there more energy. Oh, so that's it. Right. It seems like this customer has quite a tenacious heart. Despite being quite confused just now, Lynn scratched her chin and thought with a smile, and is still willing I risk starting over again. If that's the case, then I should give him many words of comfort. But there's probably no need to repeat it. Lynn raised her voice again, there are times. There will be agreements simple as you want it to be able to do. You think you're being exploited. Lynn leaned on the table and looked closer at Burton and said, for them. Your strength is not enough. But if you're alone, you still have a companion. How about having new experiences? Lynn voice sounded like an inspirational song. He said, of course you can decide. Think carefully and don't regret it in the future. If you think carefully, I will suggest someone to you. Immediately Jishu's face appeared in Lynn mind. It was a sexy girl with a plump butt. Lynn said, I have a customer named Jixu. She will have I can help you. Let me tell her later. Burton's mouth opened wide. He whispered and repeated the name, Jixu. Burton was startled. His eyes widened. He hesitated and said, isn't she? Lynn didn't wait for Burton to continue but said, that's it. He smiled brightly and said, it's that young girl. Burton's hand holding the teacup continued to tremble. Now his voice trembled as well. He said, is it really her? I see. I don't know what Burton was thinking in his heart. He looked at Lynn and said, is that what you want from me? Is this all your plan? Lynn was bewildered. Even though he didn't understand anything, he still said, The two people had two different brainwaves but their conversation was extremely compatible. Burton said, I know very well. Quote. Burton looked at Lynn who was drinking tea over there, as if seeing a person with the greatest strength in the world. Thinking to himself, since then not to achieve this. He has been preparing it from before. Lynn leisurely drank tea and wondered in her heart, how can that be? Burton was so bewildered that his eyes were as round as two chicken eggs. He looked at Lynn and thought, how can anyone predict other people's thoughts? He's terrible, and Lynn on this side turned away, smiled victoriously and thought, besides, my speaking skills are still okay. Right, I can take care of the situation. Lin Ji looked at her face reflected in the cup of tea and happily thought. When we are faced with a customer who cannot articulate their problem, we need to use what we know to ask questions. And lead thought. Lin Ji, as a psychiatrist, understood the client's problems, he thought, and in front of like how to learn to interpret them. It will depend on the feelings of the person in question. There are enough comforting words. They will be enough to take care of what he thinks. Because I will let him say them. I just need to ease his worries. Lin Ji held it again. He raised his cup of tea and smiled brightly. Thinking, speaking of which, it's probably a good thing that I want him to do it himself. Right, after all, a lot of people can't accept a 12-hour day job. A whole week. It will definitely be a good choice for him. The backs of two people sitting opposite each other, each with their own thoughts. Lin Ji is still lost in her own thoughts. Not only does it require determination but also a plan. At least he won't have to worry to make sure that rare customer will stay for a long time. Then I need to give a few words to reassure him. Luckily Miss G will be able to help him somewhat. At least then she will be able to give him a job. Besides, things are really confusing. Lin Ji's eyes lit up. He thought, I have to find a solution to this. Besides, everything it's extremely contradictory. So I need to find a way to explain it to this person. When Lin Ji picks up the teacup, you can see below the cup is the golden logo symbol, which is the two-letter symbol, L and R. And that logo belongs to Low Development Corporation. And that corporation is controlled by a strong man. Controlled by Miss G's father. It is simply a monopoly of all the mines within the lower city district. Moreover, it is present in Nuojin's industry as well. At Nuojin its popularity is unimaginable, whether it is business or daily life. If we dig deep we will find its dark corners. Even to an outsider, after staying here for only 3 years, I can feel its influence. I haven't been here for long but I have already discovered it. At that time the teenager Lin Ji had just arrived in Nuojin City and he not in this bookstore. Back to the past, Lin Ji was wearing a pair of thick glasses. He had just finished shopping and was carrying a shopping bag in his hand. He went to a room and pushed the door open. Light poured in. I also just recently found out that the company has been around for a long time if you count its predecessors. Lin Ji wore an eye mask to look inside the room. Inside the room was displayed simple arrangement. A bed and a desktop computer placed next to it. Lin Ji sat down on the chair to log into the computer. And its history is still very much mysterious. Anyway, the reason why it is truly dominated by the arrangement in Nuojin. Nuojin is divided into a lower city district and an upper district. The upper city is completely attached to the ground. It is an iron and steel city built by humans. At that time, Lin Ji was looking at the map of Nuojin City on the computer. The map can be roughly said like this. Nuojin City is divided into 3 segments. The central district is at the top. The city, the upper street, is in the middle. And the lower city district is at the bottom. If viewed from above, it would look like a giant kingdom. Lin Ji was attentively reading the newspaper on the computer. Nuojin's size is comparable to a Chinese province. And the street near the central district also has its own name. The rest is just letters or numbers. From that architecture, the district the above is man-made. It does not have any natural resources at all. All natural resources are hidden in the lower city district. The lower city district is also known as the underground world and transition zone. Next, at that time only real society can enter there. Because they are often closed. And that's the reason. It's because the residents of the lower city district are in contact with the border of Azir. In the mist outside Khao Than district. They were not patients or descendants infected with a strange disease, but were forced to be quarantined for 2 million years by an ecosystem completely different from Khao Than district. It could be said this lower city district is like a slum. At that time on the main road. If it were this place, the lower city district, then the road here could be considered an old road. That dirt road. A small figure, wearing a black robe, holding an axe in his hand. But through the dim atmosphere one can see that the other person has strange scales and antennae like octopus legs on his chin. The other person held an axe in his hand and was about to do something. Suddenly someone called his name, Red. What are you doing? The other person turned his head. His red pupils lit up and called out, "Ah, Mom." The woman called Mom had green skin with dark green hair. Around her chin there were whiskers like octopus legs. The woman asked the red child, My nephew, I can't ignore you, can I? The woman extended her hand to Red. Let's go. It's time for us to divide the rations. The woman said, now let's go home with you. Red replied, yes sir. The woman led the child along the road and heard the child ask, Grandma, I just found another stone. We will get a new bowl. The woman said, very well, you are very good, I'll give you more. Red silently looked up at his grandmother. Then Red looked up at the sparkling light above and asked, Grandma, what is that above me? It's really the place where my ancestors lived. Do those people need to work and dig rocks every day to get food? The woman said, one day you will see it for yourself. I am old and you will tell your own story when it comes. Red replied, yes. The woman took out a book. On the cover of the book was a tree with two ants blocking it like an X. The book was titled, The Plague Church. Lynn G observed that the cover image says, so, that church originated in the lower city district. It is still the main ideology today. Lynn G pushed the glasses to look at the screen thinking, after all, the high city district and the lower citadel is all separate for various reasons. Which is the reason why there are many organizations that have special privileges in moving and gathering resources for the high citadel district. Especially the competition that leads to the formation of one of the biggest companies, and that's also the Low Resources Corporation. Lin Ji stared at the computer screen thinking, now only they can control passing through the lower city district. Lin Ji straightened her arms and said, thinking about that is silly, what if only rich people could have a small bookstore and then buy the book allotment? Lin Ji sighed, I can't just dream like that. I need to work properly. The cup of tea next to Lin Ji was steaming. Just like now, the cup of tea placed in his hand was also steaming. Lin Ji thought, at that time, I never thought it was just my boss's daughter, only low group was able to get to know me. Obviously thanks to my speaking skills. Lin Ji smiled and thought, since I get used to that, it will help maintain the relationship with her, she'll be able to help you a little. When she had a problem a few days ago, I gave her instructions. After thinking about it, Lin Ji spoke up, she solved it, it's almost time for her to come back. She will be here soon. Burton was bewildered. He lowered his eyes and said, now it makes sense. He clenched his fist and thought, there is no doubt that the situation in Nuojin turned out like that. The first reason is because the hunters of the White Wolves and the Dark Magicians of the Red Sect cooperated together. It was because Helix lost the battle with the spider, Jiku. In the end he had to offer the second kaki and then ran away. And that's why Helix lost, because of the previous prey. Jiku was naturally stronger, now I understand. She was helped by the bookstore owner. So that's the reason, and he helped. Burton looked at the golden low logo printed on the cup. He thought to himself, he has opened a conflict between hunters and real society with his words. He wants to bring down real society. That's right, playing with others and creating conflicts. Burton looked at Lin Ji endlessly fantasizing countless stories. That's how devils entertain themselves. Right, but his words still lingered in my heart. It is truly enchanting. If so, what is the path you choose? Burton imagines that Lin Ji is a chess player and the balance is shaking. If Lin Ji's pieces are placed on either side, then that side will win. Burton thinks, he wants to rule over the scatterers and hunters. I haven't entered a faction yet and made them enemies of real society and the secret tower. If that were the case, it would change Nuojin's entire system. Burton imagined the whole chessboard collapsing. He concluded, it's just like his game. Burton sat in the bookstore, but he seemed to isolate himself in a corner. He placed his hands on his lap and thought, I was lucky enough to be a little pawn in there. Now that I think about it, it's because the owner of the bookstore wants me to know his intentions. Burton's eyes narrowed. He thought, he just let that flower absorb all the most intense desire in me at that time. Right from the beginning, without eating me. Burton placed his hands on the table looking at the flower, but the arrogant flower's eyes did not pay attention. Burton concluded in his heart, now I have no thoughts about receiving the recognition of the Truth Society. Completing the destruction level assessment. I don't have any ideas. But now I really want to try and see if this decision makes me regret it. Burton thought with a smile, lifting up the hunter's flag. It's really something people look forward to. Burton put his hand on his forehead. His eyes had bloodshot eyes. He smiled and whispered, I know this is very dangerous. But if I want to do that, I must be crazy. Burton raised his eyes to look at Lin Ji and thought to himself, there's still one thing I'm interested in. Burton asked Lin Ji in a tone of voice. You said you borrowed a book earlier. At this moment, Lin Ji seemed to have achieved it. Wish. He laughed loudly in his heart. Oh my god, it took half a day to finally get to the main topic. Lin Ji started his business career. He raised his hand and said, I'm talking like this. First time doing something like this. I don't have any experience. The next process is sure will definitely encounter a lot of hardships. Lin Ji immediately stood up, took a book from the shelf and said to Burton, I have an extremely useful book. You better take a look first. The other book has a black cover with the name of the book, Starting a Business from Zero, on it. Burton looked at Lin Ji's back and thought, borrow a book, just now. The bookstore owner said it was a gentleman who voluntarily borrowed a book. But the gentleman himself gained power from the bookstore owner. Follow your instructions. The communication is very clear. Burton came to his own conclusion in his heart. The owner of the bookstore used his books for strength and guidance for the nobles. Wait, could it be? Burton was bewildered and thought to himself. All of this book contains taboo power. At this time, Lin Ji held a book in front of Burton, causing him to be startled out of his thoughts. Lin Ji said, this book is extremely suitable for your current situation. Lin Ji smiled and said encouragingly, I believe you can find a new path, from which you can fulfill your own meaning and no longer need to be used by them as a tool. Losing your dignity is no longer hostile. Worthy labor. The book had a very normal cover in Lin Ji's eyes. When it was placed in front of Burton, it had a different cover. Still a black cover but surrounded by teeth. And there were 3 eyes were staring at. Burton stared at the book. He raised his hand thinking, vain sacrifice. Burton's heart was pounding as he looked at the book. And there was no sign of stopping. Burton reaching out to touch the book. Lin Ji smiled at Burton as if waiting for him to read. Burton put his hand on the book. He opened the book and glanced at a few lines of content. Then Burton dropped it again. Entering the world of books like many customers have come. Burton now seems to be standing in some other world. There is no light, only black, white and grey. Here only he stands and the book he is holding in his hand has a little light. And is grey-white, and all around is black. Burton rolled his eyes. Burton walked in the middle of the darkness. Before Burton's face looked like there were countless monsters the same white color as him. It was growling. Burton was bewildered. He opened his mouth wide in surprise. Sweat flowed down. The book fell. The paper scattered. Burton as if an eye was staring at him. Burton sat on the ground trembling non-stop. The surrounding monsters stuck out their long tongues at Burton. Then those tongues seemed to inject a substance. Something strange entered Burton's heart. The book was closed by Burton. Burton's whole body trembled. Burton's face sank into darkness. His thoughts raced. Is it an illusion of animalization? No, in the body still has the feeling of being alive. That road connecting the void still exists. It can be clearly felt. Burton looked at the book in front of him. His hand holding the book could not stop shaking. Burton thought, those existences have noticed me. Burton raised his voice and said, this is the new path. Lin Ji replied, that's right. If you really want to choose this path, then seizing opportunities is also a necessary skill. Lin Ji explained, if you can buy and sell someone without if you want. These are all gifts from people who have reached the end of the road. If you hold on firmly, it will be much easier for you. Hearing that, Burton came to a conclusion in his heart. Indeed, after the body was punctured through the path of emptiness, form can be opened at any time. One end is normal, the other end is emptiness. Cannot be explored, as long as you follow the passage and sacrifice suitable qualities for them. You can achieve it. Received their reward. Burton was like a magic practitioner and had a ball gradually cracking in front of his chest. He thought, of course this also depends on their feelings. It's really seizing the opportunity. And it's a great deal. Burton smiled triumphantly and thought, there's no doubt, the existences in the void are all God level. You can conveniently use God-level existences as gifts of power to others. I don't know what to do. What words should I use to describe the strength of the bookstore owner in front of me? Burton stood up from his chair with his hands on the table and said, thank you for your guidance. I know what to do. Lin Ji didn't stand up. He propped his elbows on the table and said, this is going to be a long road. What you need is your own strength, whether spiritual or in other aspects. Lin Ji rubbed his thumbs and said, you have to understand. If you just seize the opportunity, You won't have it. How can I achieve success? I hope the next time I see you, you will be able to achieve what you want. Burton closed his eyes, placed one hand in front of his chest, bowed slightly to Lynn G, and said, "Please follow the teachings. I will definitely not disappoint you." Burton picked up the book and coat and waved goodbye to Lynn G. He thought to himself, how great and carefree an existence can be. To be a chess piece giving to someone like this is the greatest honor. In the future, my path will definitely be much more unique than before. Burton walked out the door. Lynn G sat behind the desk and waved. Welcome next time. After Burton left, Lynn G sighed in her heart. Another lost person walked out. Don't fall into a trance from Master Lin's instructions. Lynn G turned around slightly. He sat cross-legged in a noble posture thinking, life should be full of energy like this. Outside, thunder and lightning rumbled. This place is a large villa. In front of the villa there is a statue of someone, and the surrounding swimming pool is lit up. The villa brightly lit. This place is Central District A16 Estate Nuogene's isolated island. In the room the light is bright. There is a cricket sitting by the window. A green frog is croaking on the railing. In room, Jiku sat on a chair. She looked at something intently with prepared eyes. On the table is a set of tools as if to make incense. There are spoons and some unknown boxes, along with a seal bearing the logo LR. Jiku opens the lid of a golden box. Inside is incense sticks. Looking at the tools on the table, Jiku began to do it step by step. First, she would use an object like a plate with a handle in the middle to grind the ash. Then she would grind it again. Use the seal with the LR logo printed on it to use the seal. And use the spoon to add the ash. After a while of sitting quietly and attentively working, Jiku finally saw the result. Removed the seal and saw it. The ash layer had been flattened and above the ash layer was printed the LR logo. Jiku took the fire and lit it. And the room immediately emitted smoke. She closed her eyes and enjoyed the incense. Jiku sat amidst the swirling smoke. She took out a pair of red-rimmed glasses and put them on her eyes. Then put on black gloves. Jiku had a bright smile on her mouth as she finished preparing and said, I can finally relax and read a book. It turns out that Jiku did what he did just to be able to relax and read his book. The book with a cover like an octopus lying on the table. Jiku flipped the pages of the book. A purple aura hovering around. Her eyes widened. Jiku's attentive back did not move even a bit, proving that she was very attentive and focused on the book. In behind Jiku, it was as if there were dark shadows lying on the ground. In the room the incense smoke was lingering. Outside it was raining non-stop. In front of the door there were two bodyguards standing alone guarding the door. Solemn and motionless, two men wearing dark glasses stood facing each other, looking at each other. The rain falling on the road made a foaming sound. A flash of car headlights coming from afar. The light as the car got closer and closer. The old butler stood outside the door with an umbrella, waiting for the owner of the car to get out. The old butler walked closer and covered the person inside with an umbrella as he stepped out. A man wearing a suit stepped out of the luxury car, holding an umbrella in his hand. The old butler clasped one hand in front of his chest and one hand behind his back and waited. Waiting for the man covered with an umbrella to go inside the house. He walked with a stick. The lights in the house were as bright as day. The bodyguards standing on both sides bowed to the owner of the house. Who was the man? Raised his voice and said something. And Jiku was inside, leaning heavily on the chair, sweat pouring out. She let out a phew sound. Jiku closed the book, sat back and appeared in the chair with a posture. Feeling comfortable, she took out her glasses and whispered, "What a terrible source of energy. I never thought I could read it in just a few days. It has increased me that much." She smiled with satisfaction and thought, so that I can become stronger. I am gradually able to control this body. Jiku looked at her hand from above very attentively. I can control the spread of hair follicles on my body. I've just never needed to spread my body that much. It's still a pain, but the point is that I have conquered the dream beast inside me. I will become a destruction level mage if I succeed. The dream beast inside the girl is the wolf and is gradually being tightly controlled by her using chains. Jiku rubbed the bridge of her nose thinking, it's all thanks to Mr. Lynn. He's the one who gave me this ability. She opened her eyes and stared at the book. It's an honor from Mr. Lynn. It has overcome even the poisonous blood inside me. Jiku stood up, his hands on the table and thought, blood and beast. Another way to say spirit and flesh. Blood and spirit. That is the foundation of everything. It regenerates both at the same time. The girl looked at her hand thinking, controlling the blood in the body is the first step. The only thing is to become strong to know learned how to use blood to transform animals into strength for me. Jiku looked at the rain outside the window. In any case, I need to consider a degree before thinking about returning this favor. After all, I can only gain the ability to control the blood inside. If I can get more poisonous blood, I will be even stronger. This is not just the limit of a hunter's power. Jiku leaned his hand on the window and looked outside. His thoughts running wild, the source of political power is the power I want. The hunters accompany real society and the secret tower and the monks. However, I won't be able to achieve it alone. I need more companions. Jiku put his hand on the cover of the calculation book. I was worried to tell someone about this. Because I'm afraid it won't be okay. The consequences will be unpredictable if I lose control of the poisonous blood. So I have to be even more careful. Jiku seemed to come to some conclusion, but now everything has changed and I was able to control it. Make sure it's okay. I'll be able to expand. Jiku gave a victorious smile. His serious eyes thought, this book will be the gospel of the hunter and Mr. Lynn will be the guide to my future. And Mr. Lynn, the current Lynn G are humming a song and watering flowers. Outside, at this time, their footsteps are pattering up the stairs. Jiku glanced slightly at. In the room, it was quiet without a sound. Jiku used his hand to touch a button and the cabinet door opened. Jiku put the book in the cabinet at night. The cabinet had just closed when there was a knock on the door outside. Jiku turned her head to look towards the door. The maid outside announced, "My lady. Dinner is ready." The maid pulled the door open. Then the maid stood with her hands in front and bowed her head waiting for the master. Jiku to walk out. The maid stood and closed the door, then followed the girl's footsteps and left. For some reason, Jiku smiled slightly. They didn't notice anything in the darkness. A figure was watching the two of them leave. Jiku walked with a smile down the long hallway. As she walked to the living room, her eyes flashed when she saw the man. She raised her voice and said, "Father, is there something wrong with you?" The girl's father is a very serious man. His face shows signs of age but his hair is still black. He is the head of Raw Resources Development Corporation Ji Bonong. Ji Bonong raised his voice and looked the girl. Her eyes serious, said, "Can we talk for a bit?" Jiku smiled back, "Talking? Why is that strange?" Ji Bonong's eyes narrowed slightly and looked at Jiku silently without speaking. Father and daughter went into the dining room. Ji Bonong said, "I'm a father. Who wouldn't want to eat dinner and talk to their daughter at the same time? Me. What else do I have to think about?" In the dining room there were only father and son. But there was a long table with countless chairs on both sides. Jiku walked to a chair and said, "You will underestimate me, if you think like that." Jiku said, leaning his arm on the table, "A mysterious person like you prepares dinner. Even if it's for your daughter. And you haven't. I used to eat at home. So I just had to send the food away. That is unless Dad had something to say. Right?" Ji Bonong touched his hand on the gilded chair and asked, "Is that obvious?" Jiku pulled out a chair and sat down and said, "Yes. Not only that, it's a bit late. Right now, I'm afraid you can't calm down enough to just catch up with me. Can you, Father?" Father and son sat down on the chairs. The scene in the dining room was silent. No one spoke. Ji Bonong looked at Jiku with serious eyes in front of him. Then thought of the little baby who always had a welcoming smile when seeing him return home. Ji Bonong raised his voice and said, "I have grown up." Jiku put his hand on his chin and smiled at his father and said, "Oh, so you really want to say it's normal?" Ji Bonong was a bit angry. He took a bottle of wine and said, "I'm quite shy to admit that. I still thought you were young. But it surprised me." Ji Bonong just poured the wine into the glass while saying, "As an adult, there are many things you can do on your own." The glass of wine was poured out. The red liquid flowed down the transparent glass. Ji Bonong said, "But it's your father. I'll miss out if I don't give you advice." Jiku was silent, then said, "Please tell me." Ji Bonong cut the steak on the plate and said, "I never asked you what to do. That's because of the Hunter Federation and the White Wolves. They are often used as pawns. The steak was cut into small pieces. Ji Bonong continued, I signed the contract and gave it to you. But I think that's enough. Ji Bonong's eyes looked sternly at Ji Jixu, however. Things are different now. If you are really implicated, then you will represent my company. When you stand in front of everyone. Are you clear? Ji Jixu smiled and replied, sure. The steak knife was thrown hard on the table. Ji Bonong angrily stood up and said, wouldn't you be very reckless if you understood? But Ji Jixu still looked very calmly at his father, I really understand. Ji Jixu blinked one eye mischievously and said, that's why I agreed to tell you. Dad, you have to see the plan. It's in your diary, and that's why I wanted to tell you. Ji Jixu smiled as if he knew everything in advance and said, I wrote it on purpose. Ji Bonong was startled and angry, turned to look at Ji Jixu and asked, you did it on purpose? So the signer will find out and force me to go back. Ji Jixu looked at his father dizzily. I knew that. Why were I so stupid to write for anyone to see? Why did I write a diary? The scene was silent with no one talking. Then Ji Bonong seemed to compromise and said, it seems like you've grown up. But I only see you as a child. Ji Jixu bloomed with a bright smile that couldn't be seen. He said to his father, it must be a bit difficult for you to deceive me like that. Right? Ji Bonong raised his voice and said, if that's the case, then you must have the confidence to convince me. Now Ji Bonong is like a director at the negotiating table. He sits with both hands on the table in a serious manner. Say, what is a small piece? Ji Jixu also slowly regained his smile and said in a serious voice. Do you think Dad sent someone to look for things in your room? The yellow light scene now seems to be engulfed in darkness under the green light. Ji Bonong was startled into silence again. He was quite surprised by his daughter's question. Ji Bonong asked, how do you know? Ji Jixu smiled and thought, looks like I surprised him. Ji Jixu clasped his hands together and rubbed his thumbs saying, give up. They will find the result you are looking for. In Nuo Jin, everyone has heard the name Ji Bonong. He's the highest authority in raw resources. Throughout the year, Ji Bonong has been in close contact with numerous different organizations and their higher-ups. The Order of Truth, the Tower of Secret Rites, hunters, wizards, churches, the general public, etc. He has all contacts and has the right way to respond. Rarely when he encounters a situation he feels out of control. Under Ji Bonong control, raw resources not only monopolized the mining rights of the entire lower district, but he's also gotten very close with the supernatural hidden being. One might say he's one of them. Among the employees working for raw resources, many are supernatural beings. Someone once said this about Ji Bonong. If you look into his iron gold eyes, he'll read your innermost thoughts. His subordinate is a red-haired man, wearing a black eye patch that covers only his eyes. None other than the present Max. He said, sir, the lady is inside. Ji Bonong said, yes. Both stood in front of Ji Jixu's room door. Max pushed the door open only to see inside. Ji Jixu was practicing hard and sweating full body. She lifted it up and down. It turned out the girl was doing stretching exercises. She was trying to stretch with the exercise machine. Ji Jixu gritted her teeth and endured its weight. After a while she was silent and then let it go. A pink-haired girl next to her immediately came over with a towel. That girl was Kay. Kay said, you've worked hard. Take a rest for a while. Ji Jixu sat on the mattress breathing heavily and said, thank you. She took the towel to wipe her sweat and glanced at the man who had just arrived. She smiled, father, you're here. Ji Bonong raised his voice and asked Ji Jixu, how is your recent condition? Ji Jixu replied, everything is normal. Following your arrangements I have always persevered in training my body and mind. Ji Bonong was pleased to praise, very good. Ji Bonong said to the next person, Max. Take that out. Max opened the box and said, yes sir. Only to see inside the box were 2 red ampoules along with a syringe. Ji Jixu stared. She was startled. She looked at the 2 medicine tubes and said, corrupted blood. She still sat still on the chair and said, father. Is now the right time? Ji Bonong said, that's right. I judge now is the most suitable time. Ji Jixu's hand holding the towel tightened. Lin Ji raised his hand to tell her, starting from today is a superhuman. Ji Bonong looked at his little daughter, about the situation you have to face and the responsibility you have to shoulder after having this power. You have prepared carefully. Yet, the girl's yellow pupils also saw her father's appearance. She clenched her fist and said, "Yes, father." Hearing that, Ji Bonong said, "That's good." He explained, "As you know, due to causes and genes, most of us northerners are normal people. If we want to become super products, we can only do it through corrupted blood, through the shortcut of being a hunter. The price of the shortcut is very dangerous. The so-called pulling the plug on the forest. As the owner of raw resources, I cannot bet on the pollution rate of more than 10%. He clenched his hands and said, "Otherwise, if any unexpected problem occurs, the whole raw resources will be overwhelmed with disaster." Ji Jixu raised his eyes to look at his father and said, "Father." Ji Bonong touched the red tube of antidote like to say, "This corrupted blood is something I have touched with my hands. The very high quality will be reduced to the lowest. The probability of contamination and the body turning into an animal is at most just parts like the end of the hand, the legs or the tips of the arms will slightly turn into animals, and will not affect the child's appearance too much." Ji Jixu remained silent without answering. Ji Bonong lowered his eyes, put his hands in his pocket and said, "Finally, this is my personal gift to you." Ji Bonong stood looking at the map on the wall and said, "Let the mutation take control a large organization. Raw resources will get rid of the administrators from above. If it causes trouble, it will be the end of the organization. So that's why we have to be careful. From now on, distance her from the public. This will avoid problems related to raw resources. The more she is like that, the better it will be." Ji Bonong looked at Max and said, "Instead of paying attention to raw resources, it would be better, especially if she focuses on the hunter. The best scene would be for her not to worry about this company, only to have an image that she can comfortably develop in the mutant world." Ji Bonong's face was serious. "Raw resources will not be the goal I set for Jixu. It is the starting point." Ji Bonong placed his hand on Max's shoulder saying, "This is the last thing first when my daughter can stand on her own. Please protect her." Max's eyes behind the black cloth were serious. Then he put one hand under it and said, "I." Max knelt down. His feet hit the ground, his red hair fluttering. Max said, "I swear on my life." Max went out and closed the door, leaving Ji Bonong in the room alone. Ji Bonong stood still without moving. After a while, Ji Bonong sat down on the chair, opened the cabinet and saw a file inside with pictures of red medicine men. He was silent. After a while, Ji Bonong said to himself, "With it I have guaranteed everything. That's the basics." Ji Bonong thought of his daughter. All of that is for the main team regularly. Once you follow it, there will be no turning back. Anyway, you will bring it here. Ji Bonong's eyes narrowed. He smiled silently. "As a father, I look forward to him. I wonder what you will say when you surpass my expectations." He was a satisfied smile. At this moment, Ji Bonong seemed to wake up from his memories. He opened his eyes wide and stared at his daughter's figure in his eyes. Ji Jixu held a book with a black cover in his hand and said, "This is my blood wound." Ji Jixu also looked at his father with his pupils. That yellow color. The father and son sat on the dining table, surrounded as if there were octopus tentacles swaying. The man put his hand on his forehead, covering his eyes, thinking, "I have to admit that I was careless. I didn't expect that I would lose twice to my daughter. The relationship that I thought I understood the most. Even guessing my actions and thoughts. So that's it. So this is the feeling." Ji Bonong looked at the more mature girl in front of him and thought, "It's strange that the young girl in my imagination is now learning manners. Is now a confident hunter and can fool even her father. Mine." Ji Bonong stared at the book as if understanding and said, "That's your trading form. It seems like he's changed you a lot. Right?" Ji Bonong stood up and said, "But you haven't convinced me yet. The most important thing is not the book but its origin." Ji Bonong pulled out a chair and sat across from his daughter. "I said, this plan is like a storm. It's too risky for raw resources. A choice that seems to have many changes." Ji Bonong seriously said, "It's a choice that requires you to be careful. I can't participate in it. What can I get by giving class resources? Meaning, what does the person behind me want to get through raw resources?" Quote. Ji Jixu listened silently. She thought to herself, "Just as I thought. Dad knows the relationship between the bookstore owner and me." Ji Jixu also poured a glass of wine and said, "Someone once said." Ji Jixu held a glass of wine, looked up at his father and said, "When there is enough funding to do it, businessmen will do anything. I think it will be no exception." Ji Bonong stared at his daughter silently without speaking. He took a sip of wine. Then he said, "For an ordinary businessman that's true. But we are different." Ji Jixu countered and said, "Yes. If I hadn't been injected with poisonous blood, I wouldn't have been able to get stronger so quickly. It was all a gift from this book." Ji Jixu put his hand on the book and said, "A book like that is not something you can afford to buy. Father, how about it, if you can be properly guided to it?" Ji Bonong remained silent. Ji Jixu asked, "So is it good or bad for raw resources?" Ji Bonong said again, "However, considering the information from the secret tower, that level K is still very mysterious. If we contact immediately." Ji Jixu then interrupted his father, "From those what I saw from the few times I visited, the shop owner did it his way." She remembered Lin Ji, a person who was proficient in reading books. She said that Mr. Lin always followed the morals of that bookstore owner. If Dad follows him, he will be quite friendly. Ji Bonong put his hand on his nose and silently lowered his eyes to think. After a while he looked up at his daughter. He said, "But I'm not good at doing so." Ji Jixu said again, "After all, I don't have enough to represent raw resources to talk to Mr. Lin. If you think it is possible, then tell him, and then you will have can decide whether to accept or reject it." Outside it was still pouring rain and there was no sign of stopping. The lightning in the sky was still flashing. In another base in the lighted room a person's voice rang out, "We can't go on like this. Okay, the situation is getting more and more desperate. They have too many casualties. We can't keep fighting like this with the secret tower." In the Helix room was the leader. He sat on a chair in the middle of the wooden table. He sat quietly listening to the people. The other said, a cloaked person said, "They haven't separated from the middle-aged knights yet. How can we win?" Another argued, "Stop talking. I can't stop yet. We must continue." Others said, "How? The red sect is gone. We won't have enough energy to inherit anymore. We can't continue to hatch the mirror magic. I don't know how we'll continue." They argued silently back and forth saying, "Helix is so insolent." At this moment Helix raised his voice and shouted, "Shut up." Helix set the table and stood up and said, "Remember, my goal is to hatch the magic mirror, not to win against the secret tower. As long as I hatch it, I win. I don't want to hear any more." Helix shouted, "Real Society has sent a shipment of silver meteorites to Route 78. In 3 days I will rob it. Is this clear?" The group of people silently obeyed and said, "Yes, sir." They dispersed, waited for the group to leave. The door closed. Helix covered his head and sighed. Helix sat back in his chair and said, "The silver meteorite box is almost enough to incubate the magic mirror. But if I say so, it will be the end for the White Wolves. Is there really nothing I can do?" Quote. Helix pondered and didn't know what to do. At this moment, a black aura appeared in the room with 2 blue eyes and said, "I can solve your problem." Helix was startled and quickly shouted, "Who is there?" That light bulb flooded in like a flood. Around the black shadow there were countless snakes, with blue eyes sticking out their tongues. That shadowy figure was Wild and it was dark. Wild's whole body was black. Following that silhouette were the silhouettes of a strange snake. In Helix's slightly bewildered and frightened eyes, Wild said in his voice, "The mirror is a joke. Torch. And life is the best fuel." The rain is pouring down. Outside at the headquarters of the secret tower, people are coming in and out non-stop. Joseph sits on a chair. He is the beaming knight and staff commander. Joseph picked up the cup of tea on the table and took a sip after drinking the tea. Joseph spoke in a slightly annoyed voice to the person on the other side of the table. "Do you want me to say what I think about the bookstore owner?" Joseph's eyes narrowed slightly. After a moment of silence, Joseph placed his cup on the table and said, "Before that, please tell me what you thought when you heard about the indescribable thing." The other person remained silent and said nothing. Joseph smiled and looked at the other person. Joseph asked himself and answered himself. He said, "Isn't it said that ancient dragons were in the prehistoric era? That ancient dragon was a purple-eyed dragon, leading a group of giant dragons that could breathe fire." Joseph said again, "Or the giant in the primeval age." The giant that Joseph said was Wild's master. Joseph said, "Or the goblin king in the second era." The elf king in Joseph's mouth is the first leader of the elves. Who are elves in the form of girls with many different powers? Joseph said again, "Or are the 4 witches from the beginning with absolute power?" The 4 witches were silver-haired beauties with purple pupils. after saying a series of names of powerful people in the past. Joseph said again, sure. That power is beyond dispute. But that person gave me a different impression. Joseph thought of Lynn G. A person sitting cross-legged on a chair with a book in his hand. His shadow fell like a giant monster. Joseph concluded, it is not strong but great. Joseph's face was very serious. He concluded, in general. Joseph raised a finger and asked the other person, don't understand. Joseph was also very kind and used an example to explain to the other person. Let us use a metaphor. Moths have something called body movements. So they follow their instinct and fly into the fire. Joseph said solemnly, but usually they wouldn't be stupid enough to get caught on fire. Because even though they're small, moths have very long and stiff legs, but they still have the most basic survival instinct. Moths can rush into fire but never rush into fire stupidly. But to put it another way, if there is a moth that can, what would the ability to look at the sun do? Will it tremble from the heat and light of the sun, or will it admire what is before its eyes? It can only be one thing. It is to give up thinking and then follow instinct. Even the body turns its soul to ashes. Imagine a moth ready for the light the sun shines and rushes in. Joseph looks at his mechanical hands and says, it's still happy to have sacrificed itself to the fire. That's him. Joseph's real hands are placed next to him, tapping on the bar chair. He said, now he wants me to let him take care of the Candela problem. Joseph put his hands on the edge of the chair and smiled, baring all his teeth, saying, do you think I can refuse? The black-haired and bearded man sat opposite, trembling and not daring to make a sound. Joseph continued, no one knows about that sword better than me. Candela, it's a terrible sword. Indescribable level of panic. No matter how strong it is still impossible to resist its erosion of the soul and mind. It will always lead to death. The Tower of Secrets has always chosen the Night of the Dawn, the best Radiant, to master it. To temporarily suppress the sword. But the Radiant Knights all died. The Secret Tower began to lose hope of Candela's curse. Imagine how strong the Knights were of the Tower. Secret letters became prey to that sword one after another and then lost their lives one after another. Joseph sat under the yellow light explaining, but the book borrowed by the bookstore owner has the power to suppress the sword written on it. Meaning he has a better way to keep it. Joseph concluded, that's why he wanted that sword. Is because he saw my pain and wanted to save me. No matter how he looked then, I should still give him the responsibility of the Candela sword. Joseph stood up to leave. Before leaving he told the black-haired man, it's the best. At this time the black-haired man opened his mouth and said, please. The black-haired man looked towards Joseph's back and shouted, wait. The black-haired man with a trembling face looked at Joseph's back and said, have you carefully considered the consequences? If it is used by the devil, and also the impact on the reputation of the Secret Tower. Joseph turned his head to look at the black-haired man with a serious face and said, I didn't watch. I never cared. Maintaining the image is up to the Council of Elders. The black-haired man heard it and wanted to break down. Joseph reached out and turned the doorknob and said, what knights believe in is justice in the heart. The door slammed shut. On the other side, the monitor is recording the image of the person in charge, saying, recording completed. The person in charge is observing the virtual screen on the projector, saying that the recording of Knight Joseph's interview when he was asked to transfer is complete. The person in charge is the Secret Tower, the Council of Elders, outside the Elder Central Contact Place. The other person is a beautiful woman, with silver hair and a very seductive office dress. And right now in the Secret Tower, the office of the Council of Elders. Inside, several elders sitting around a large round table are observing of Joseph's interview on the virtual screen in the middle of the table. After watching, they were silent and said nothing. An old man moved his lips to say something. On this side, Joseph walked out of the other room, walked down the long hallway. The people working outside looked at Joseph, each saying, good job, Chief Knight. A girl said, sir. Radiant Knight. Claude followed holding the file and said, have you eaten yet? Claude said while preparing the file, sir. I have seen the recent activities of the White Wolves and analyzed it first. Joseph said, continue, as he walked. Claude looking at the file, it said, the hunters are more familiar with neogene structure than us. They are everywhere. While we were following them, they suddenly disappeared, so we could only find them. Searching all over the streets but to no avail. That's why we have a new plan by linking neighboring locations. We have successfully reduced the way to go through the tunnels. Why Claude gave that result? Because she led the people of the secret tower to search but in the end found nothing. Claude looked at Joseph and said, now the area of the white wolves has decreased. Joseph stopped and said, this city has existed for a long time. The real map is inside the heads of those who are old. Complete a map is impossible. Joseph's eyes were solemn, there is no one like that at the white wolves. Joseph in front said, someone helped them. Claude was startled. His eyes behind his glasses narrowed slightly. Claude flipped through the file and took notes a few lines later. Claude continued to report. In the past few days, we have destroyed 3 shelters. We arrested more than 20 white wolf hunters. They were interrogated as I said. Claude said, they are quite normal. They tried to use mental magic but their spirit was broken. Pointed I saw in Claude's file that there were people who tried to concentrate on creating magic but ended up scratching their heads. Claude continued, they also injected poisonous blood into their bodies first. So they went crazy when stimulated. Joseph laughed hearing that, they're quite smart. Joseph gritted his teeth and crossed them. He said, they don't need to worry about their information being revealed. What if they're crazy? If we open our brains, we'll see beautiful flowers. Claude looked at the report on the file and said, the white wolves also know they have reached their limit. They have become even crazier and less rational. Not only taking resources but also destroying and destroying just for fun. Quote. Claude's hands clenched and trembled slightly. It's because of the panic of the civilians. Joseph glanced at Claude and was silent. He pressed the elevator button and said, they are quite tight on that information. Joseph said, after all, to a commoner in Nuo Jin, mutants are just legends. It's not easy to say that and maintain community contact. Claude thought of a certain bald young man. Right, working closely. She thought to herself, they have to continue with things like the garage overflow to hide the truth. It's all because of that bald guy. Claude smiled wryly and said, indeed. At this moment Joseph spoke again, forget it. You said there was nothing about the destruction of the white wolves. Right, oh dear Claude. You know you can't judge by appearances alone. The two of them stood in the elevator. Joseph looked outside the elevator and said, the special thing about magic mirror generation is the ability to enter the mind. They want to aim at magic mirror generation to swallow desire. It's different from what they need it for. Claude's face was reflected in the elevator mirror. He said, if they didn't mean it to get my attention, they should have done it for some reason. Claude looked at the file and said, they are just exploring them. Collecting the bodies after killing them. They are probably trying to replicate the Murphy ritual. However, I can't see any sacrificial rituals in this condition. Claude's eyes looked solemnly at the report file and said, it just occurred to me. Can't real society give out printed copies of Nuo Jin? Even they can tell me about it. A part about it. At this point, Joseph raised a finger and said, just a part will be enough to find what's wrong from an architectural perspective. Joseph analyzed and said, so we will be able to open those mysteries. Some of them are created by real society very easily. Joseph glanced at Claude behind him and said, do you know why they refused? That's so stupid, Claude. The elevator reached the desired floor number. Claude heard Joseph say but remained silent and did not respond. At this moment Joseph came closer to her and rubbed her head and said, if I supplement my brain you'll probably find the hole very empty. It's true. Claude's head was rubbed until her hair was messed up. She could only stand shyly scratching her head. She thought to herself, it seems like the teacher is happy. Her eyes looked at Joseph walking away and said, if I can't defend myself against society in reality, I'll think differently. What do they use the secret tunnel for? Just when Claude wasn't paying attention, Joseph put a hand on Claude's shoulder and told her, think of it as practice. The white wolves won't last long. Joseph comforted Claude's soul, if I say about that in real society. Maybe they will say that collecting information and analyzing evidence is the basic duty of the elite side. If they can't do it, why don't they meet with the theoretical side? Joseph glanced and looked at Claude and said, that board is much more difficult than I said. Claude seemed to be enlightened. She glanced at Joseph and called loudly, teacher. Joseph looked at her again with serious eyes and said, but if it is possible if we locate the secret tunnel, our finances will be fine. The real world is very rich and they will keep it a secret from us. Claude felt like he was lost. Holding the file and saying, yeah, to his office. Joseph walked in and asked, how is the situation with the Red Sect? Claude put his hand over his mouth and thought for a moment, then started flipping through the file in his hand and said, because they lost Murphy. They have no one to lead him anymore. Claude pushed the glasses and remembered the zombies that ravaged her and said. Mostly the zombies were controlled by Murphy. When she died they lost control. The dark mages went missing or joined the white wolves. Meaning that cult broke up. Claude thought to a certain female elf Doris. She said, that's terrible. That elf isn't very strong at the destruction level. Based on the evidence she destroyed Murphy. After Claude finished speaking, he clearly saw Joseph narrowing his eyes and pouting his lips as he looked towards her. She immediately waved her hand and said, but it's clear that you are the strongest destroyer. So I should say that because I have never seen anyone as strong as you. At this moment Joseph looked at Claude again and said, that's enough. Of course the most impressive is the owner of the bookstore. Joseph said about Lynn G's back. The sage of the Iris family. Even saying he is the master means the whole Iris family still serves him. Joseph's eyes were serious. He said, how would the others know how to react? Claude stood behind the desk and said, only the elite and superiors know. There are other things about the bookstore owner, but they are still the same. Claude said, not only submit the application, but also scared. Joseph gave a satisfied smile. You're right. Anyone who is smart would be like that. Not only that, this time thanks to Mr. Lynn. Otherwise we have to wait until Murphy destroys it. There are also strong people like Wild in Nuo-Jin. Joseph leaned on the back of the chair and rubbed the bridge of his nose and said, because of that. It would be stupid for us not to evaluate Mr. Lynn. That's why we submitted the application. If they looked at the whole scene, the Council of Elders would know the risk. Joseph's mechanical hand rested on the table. Beat. He said, fossils aren't stupid enough to send someone to investigate like that. Joseph said with a smile, speaking of which, there is no warning yet. The realists are just joking. Maybe we can make a profit if we use their resources to catch them. Right. On the other side, a person's hand crushed a pen. One old man looked at the other and asked, what's wrong, Vice President, what's wrong? Only saw Andrew trembling all over, not knowing what to do. Andrew turned around and said to them, nothing. I just feel a bit strange. Let's continue. The two old men Walter Leonard and Lowell Fitch turned away, then they whispered to each other, is he thinking about Miss Doris? Don't talk about losing the budget now. Walter Leonard thought about the budget and got sad. He said, funding. And on this side Joseph took Claude's file and said, go and do it. I'll look at it later. Claude turned and left. The door closed. Joseph sat in the room silently. After a while, when he looked at the computer, there was a message in the mailbox and he opened it. The content of the message was as follows, to Joseph. The Council of Elders has responded to the request for Knight Abraham Joseph. Then the request was denied about the Candela Sword. However, the Council of Elders has collected opinions and considered it as evidence according to the number 0113 level K. We will send someone to investigate. If the results are as you said, we will approve and sign the secret tower. Letter of the Council of Elders. Joseph read it and was bewildered. His whole body felt like he had been struck by lightning. Claude had just walked out of the room waving to his colleagues when there was a loud shout in the room, Elder Council. Joseph's scream made the people and Claude outside feel like there was interference. Shaking for a while, especially Claude, she fell to the ground. She pushed her glasses in confusion. The other people were also very confused. Looking at the door to Joseph's room. Was still outside at this time. A pair of white shoes walked in the rain. A pair of feet wearing long tights was walking. A beautiful woman with long silver hair, covering a red umbrella, wearing glasses. The beautiful woman was wearing an office teacher's outfit, holding a book in her hand. She walked to the front of the bookstore and looked up. There was also a book under her lips. A small mole. She looked at the bookstore and said, this is the mission of this job. Number 0113 level K. At the Council of Elders. At that time the elders sat around the round table. They talked to each other. An old man said, Area Level 1. Number 0113 is a bookstore that looks very normal, but it is a new file. The great Knight Abraham Joseph personally arranged the compilation. They looked at the Candela Sword reflected on the projection screen. The old man said, this bookstore has caused trouble during this magical egg incident. Exerted a great influence that directly or indirectly led to the rapid disintegration of the White Wolves and the Red Spear. But Joseph also decided to transfer the Demon Sword. The old man explained and said, "This is an active record. The first request is related to the owner of this bookstore, whose purpose is to get the magic sword." The old man said, clapping his hands. Based on Joseph's description, the owner of the bookstore wanted to save him from his suffering. The projector screen showed Lin Ji's image again. The old man said, "But elder, we can't just rely on Joseph's words alone. It's easy to hand over the demon's sword," he said, resting his hand on his cane. "Especially now that the Tower of Secret Rites hasn't gotten any real intelligence about the bookstore owner." The old man's eyes narrowed, so through the unanimous discussion of the elders. The final decision is to conduct close range or complete observation, recording and assessment. They looked Lin Ji's face on the projector screen said, to judge whether the bookstore owner's identity is good or evil. His purpose and strength. Another old man sitting on the side placed his hands on the table and said, "For we have no other opinion on this conclusion. But if we want to evaluate and speculate on a person similar to a god-level powerhouse. As for the person chosen to investigate, you need to choose carefully." The old man wearing a cape said, "I understand what Mr. Solomon means. Not everyone has the opportunity to observe and evaluate a level 1 existence." The old man turned over a piece of paper. So, I decided to send the deputy chief of the logistics section, Lucy Caroline, to complete the evaluation. She's a quarter-blood harpy and can sense one's nature. She's gifted with mind mastery talents as well. That old man smiled and said, "Among the evaluators of the Tower of Secret Rites, she is probably the most outstanding person. But without a doubt, she is the most cautious person currently." Through the interview, meeting of the Elders Association, Lucy, a beautiful woman wearing red glasses and big breasts, appeared at the bookstore this time and said, "This is the target of this evaluation mission. This girl is Lucy Caroline, Commissioner of the Elder Council of the Tower of Secret Rites, Deputy Chief of Logistics Department, Panicky ranked Knight of the Tower Professional Evaluator." Lucy looked up above. She thought, must remember the purpose of this action. Great. In order not to cause more trouble. As a representative of the Tower of Secret Rites, pretend to use the identity of a bookstore customer to talk to the owner. Trying to complete the addition to file number 0113 to judge the supply. Provide a base for the elder to pass away. Lucy held a book and a file and looked at the store in front of her. Thinking, hope everything goes well. She pursed her lips and raised her hand to push the door open. The jingle bell rang again. Lin Ji raised her voice and said, "Welcome." Lucy folded her umbrella and she breathed a phew. Lucy looked at Lin Ji sitting far away. The statue and rose placed on both sides. She silently assessed, this is the legendary bookstore owner, who appears in the list of central characters causing trouble in Nuo Jin. As expected, looking at his appearance, he is completely normal, without any trace. Lucy's eyes flashed to Lin Ji's silhouette. She thought to herself, but you absolutely cannot be fooled by appearances. Besides deception, this person is level 1. Lucy walked towards Lin Ji. She thought as she passed by. I heard that he faced Joseph face to face in silence, directly pushing down the existence of crisis in him. I, faced with an existence like this, must maintain absolute respect. I cannot find a way to die or make him unhappy. Lucy pulled out her chair. Calculations running endlessly in her heart. Stay calm. You can't let stress affect your actions. You must work carefully according to your plan. Lucy sat down, placed her hands on the table politely. She smiled warmly at Lin Ji. "Hello." Lin Ji closed the book he was reading in his hand. He looked at Lucy who was smiling. He thought to himself, oh. Lin Ji's face turned slightly red. Lin Ji saw Lucy's huge bust and silently thought, new customer. No, wait. Lin Ji turned her eyes to look more closely at Lucy. The occupational disease in Lin Ji's heart started to run again. Lin Ji analyzed, this person is extremely natural. Revealing an innocent smile. Very professional in seduction. That angle and that level of proficiency. Although because the other person is female, the focus may be different. Lin Ji's eyes were full of judgment. Looked at Lucy, but a familiar feeling arose. This extremely naturalness could not be fake. Subconsciously the body smiled this commercialized standard smile. Lin Ji looked at Lucy with flashing eyes and thought, this guy might be a colleague. Lin Ji was a bit confused in her head, in other words. This sexy customer in front of me is not a customer. Not only is he not a customer, but it is quite possible that he is coming here to buy things and extort money. I'm here, how can I stand it? Lin Ji cracked her knuckles, causing them to crack. Lin Ji thought to herself. These two standard hellos, combined with this smile, have revealed that there's nothing left to discuss. Are you planning on making a sales pitch? Is it a survey or something? Behind Lin Ji's back, a strong purple-black aura seemed to emerge. He thought to himself, this type of person, your boss, Lin, has of course seen too many of them. This type of person comes to the door not only to suggest entanglement, non-stop and time-wasting. Lin Ji rubbed two fingers. Her face turned black. Her eyes looked critically at Lucy, thinking, there's no meaning in wanting to buy books, borrow books or read books at all. But Teacher Lin is here, isn't he? Good name. If you dare to come to my door today, not to mention offering even multi-level sales, you must be my customer once. Lin Ji's whole body seemed to radiate a strong and fierce aura. Those laser-like eyes were rushing to look at Lucy, thinking, after speaking, let me wait for your next line to be. Lin Ji raised her voice and said, may I ask, are you the owner of this bookstore? Lucy also raised her voice and said, may I ask, are you the owner of this bookstore? As soon as she opened her mouth to say that, her eyes suddenly opened wide and she was startled by what Lin Ji said. It was as if she fell into an old tape. She was startled and thought, what? Lucy was startled. Her eyes behind the glass looked at Lin Ji in disbelief, thinking, did he read my mind or did he know in advance that I was completely unaware of it? He could do that. ? Lucy looked at Lin Ji on the opposite side as if she saw a shadowy shadow and thought, is this a direct warning? She screamed in her heart. Dean Joseph, where's the friendliness you said? Lucy was so scared her whole body trembled, thinking, save me. And Lin Ji on this side, seeing Lucy's reaction, smiled and thought, just trying to put down the buffalo scalpel. I directly destroyed the attack line. Not ashamed of me. That kind of atmosphere I saw. Seeing you is the key to regaining the right to speak first from overwhelming the other person's momentum. Directly disrupting her hormones is equivalent to taking out half of her tube. Quote. Lin Ji leisurely smiled and looked at Lucy, thinking in her heart, what is the art of speaking? As long as the mind is not stable, it will have no effect. Lin Ji leaned back slightly in her chair and thought, all the art of speaking in general is actually a kind of psychological strategy. You have to grasp your opponent's psychology very closely. What you say must be right. Pick the itch and go straight to the heart. The most important thing is not to give the other person time to hesitate. Lin Ji picked up the cup of tea on the table, must stay steady, precise and strong. Pull the other person directly in the rhythm and field that you are knowledgeable about. The simplest method of leading is to ask questions. Lin Ji took a sip of tea and thought through questions with a specific or clear direction, implying that she can extremely quickly lead the opponent and her rhythm. Lin Ji imagined herself playing a dice game and silently thought she wants to have her main topic first of all takes the dominant position of the person asking the question. So according to normal logic, this greeting is followed by an assertion as a question. Lin Ji looked at the face of the girl in front of her and thought slightly tremblingly. As a seasoned conversational therapist, life coach, and soul healer, it's obvious that my skill has become very advanced and beyond the reach of anyone else. I'm not gonna let her boss me around. Lin Ji put the hot tea on the table and said to Lucy, no need to be surprised. Following Lin Ji's voice, Lucy's face became even more panicked. Lin Ji said, if you actively chose to come to this place, have you never thought about what situation you would encounter? Lin Ji's face and voice in Lucy's eyes was the face of an angry person with red pupils like laser beams and an extremely creepy voice. Lin Ji said, how much more especially aimed at me? Do you think I don't know what you do? Lin Ji thought to herself. If you want to come here to sell and still find the boss, you're a newbie who just has a little success and likes to go everywhere. Just use the art of speaking to do something. Lin Ji's eyes flashed slightly. Young people these days are really impulsive. Lin Ji glanced at Lucy with eyes as sharp as knives and said, follow me. I see that your every move is too shallow. Your purpose is too strong. Today's young people should not be so rude. They should be more mature. At this moment, Lucy's sweat fell to the ground. She not daring to move. He clenched his hands on his thighs and thought to himself, he certainly knows my purpose like the back of his hand. Because of his seemingly rude action, it has disturbed him, made him feel unhappy. That's why he warned me like that. He can't be wrong. I understand everything. Lucy imagines herself in Lin Ji's eyes as naked and her thoughts are seen through. Lucy thought to herself, he has seen everything about me. He deliberately said what he wanted to say at the same time, clearly implying that I don't have any secrets to hide. Before his eyes, Lucy imagined herself as just a chess piece in Lin Ji's hand. A person at the level of a god. Like a devil, she thought, my thoughts, my soul, I see everything will be turned over in his hands to play with as he pleases. It's so terrible that it makes people's skin crawl. Lucy seemed to confirm the guess in her heart. Sweat fell all over her feet and she said, if there is anything that makes you feel unhappy, I sincerely apologize. Sorry for disturbing you. She raised her head. Her lips moved and said to Lin Ji, but please forgive me. There are a few small questions I have to ask. Lucy thought to herself, it's okay. Things can still be turned around. Currently the other party is still in a peaceful state, probably seeing my purpose and wanting to alert and threaten me so that I know how to handle it. So the only thing left to do is continue to maintain a respectful attitude. Okay, Lucy put a hand on her chest and said, this is very important to you and to us. If you agree to cooperate in answering a little about these questions, we would be extremely grateful. This means a lot to Nuo Jin. Lin Ji looked at Lucy. He smiled and thought, oh, this is interesting. This beautiful lady's expression is extremely determined. But the other thing is clearly that she is taking. It seems that the other party uses the form of filling out a survey for the purpose of either collecting information to find a suitable product to offer or investigating the situation of a certain item. Lin Ji rubbed her chin and thought to herself, but you even invited Nuo Jin. But you're more daring than expected. Lin Ji looked at Lucy. He sat back in the chair, crossed his legs and said, what's the small question? Lucy wiped the sweat from her forehead and took a deep breath, thinking, luckily, it seems this man's personality is really not bad. At least it shows that his stance is not on the evil side. Lucy started her career. She took out a pen from her bag and started taking notes and asked Lin Ji, may I ask, when did you open this bookstore? Lin Ji, after hearing the question, was a little confused and thought to herself, but it's a question like this. If this is called a sales pitch, it's not appropriate at all. So what kind of investigation must you be doing? That's it. Lin Ji thought about her black inky friend, humming a sentence in her heart thinking, how should I answer her? I can't say I was teleported here by an unknown being and I have to sell books for a living. Lin Ji put her chin in her hands and thought to herself, that would be too embarrassing. It's simple, really, my interest and fate brought me here. Lucy heard that and replied, so that's it. She wrote in her notebook. She wrote down Lin Ji's answer inside. After writing it down, Lucy silently looked at Lin Ji and asked, so what do you think about what happened before? Here, quote. Lin Ji sat silently. Lin Ji thought to herself, what happened before? The gas explosion. Are they actually planning to do some research on these ruins? Lin Ji smiled, good job. He smiled, coughed and said, it's not like that. The previous incident was very unfortunate. Lin Ji stood up and spoke in a very normal voice. But there are some people who really deserve to die. Their lives, it's so precious. It's not something that can be trampled on. He thought to himself, I heard in the press that the coal gas factory's management was not good. And not being repaired for a long time led to such a tragedy. Clearly, there are some people who are forced to take responsibility for this. Quote. Lucy pushed her glasses and said, I see. Thank you for your answer. Lucy wrote down on the paper Lin Ji's answer below the question. The question was, what does the bookstore owner think of the Scarlet Cult and White Wolves? And the answer was, he's disgusted by the Dark Wizards in both groups. He agrees with the Tower of Secret Rites. Finished writing, Lucy looked at the file and asked, one more question. How do you feel about what you did? Lin Ji was extremely confused and thought to himself, what does this question have to do with the previous questions? Surely it's not specifically coming to humor me. At this moment, Lin Ji suddenly realized something. Wait. It seems like I've thought clearly. It must be the situation like this. Lin Ji began to fall into a spiral of speculation and wondering to herself. The reason why I opened the shop here was because I wanted to know the advantageous situation of this area. But ask what I thought about the conversion when lowering the goal. And more clearly, I wanted to know which aspects of the population were affected. The impact of this event in terms of research and investigation. In fact, proved that the opponent's purpose and the coal gas explosion were related to each other. Combined with a little bit of questioning at the end about the situation of opening the store. Quote, Lynn G looked at Lucy in front of her and concluded. In short, these questions are mainly about understanding the general situation of neighboring stores. Which is the main starting point. Because the explosion flattened a large number of buildings in front of this area. It was clear that the beautiful girl and a certain company behind her wanted to evaluate the price through research. The mining authority of this area then takes the right to rebuild and exploit the ruins in front of here. Lynn G's face was serious, thinking in her heart, running like a deer, why do you want to use this incomprehensible trick to investigate? It's probably because you're competing with other competitors. You need to keep it secret. But I was tricked into coming here by Inky, arranging this bookstore completely at random. Lynn G looked at Lucy in front of her, thinking a little worriedly, in this research, it is estimated that it belongs to the type of data that is meaningless. In short, even if that's the case, it's not a bad thing to have a convenient opportunity to promote yourself. Lynn G looked at Lucy, who was smiling in front of her, and thought. From your professional level, this skilled customer, coupled with his outstanding appearance and temperament, the scale of the company behind him is definitely not small. Otherwise there wouldn't be this kind of high-class investigator in my home bookstore. If you can take the opportunity to enter the market and increase the consumption class, wouldn't that mean you can fly up? After thinking about it, Lynn G revealed her 40 teeth and said, I really enjoy what I'm doing now. For me, what I'm doing is the meaning of my life. Quote, Lynn G sat on the chair and explained in detail. I will recommend suitable books to suitable people, hoping they can escape the short-term darkness and gain some of my own insight. Body. From there I can take one step forward on my own path. Even though I have no income. But every time I see customers no longer gloomy but excited again, I always feel extremely happy. Have fun. Lynn G smiled and said, I would be happy to help guide some people out of their difficulties. Lynn G looked at Lucy with an appraising look and said, for example, those who are depressed, because of my job like you. In Lynn G's eyes, it was like pouring a ball of evil down on her. Lynn G thought deeply, if I took up some of my time to answer these questions, hey little girl, then consider it equal in return for using me to spread propaganda. Let's do it like that. Lucy's eyes widened, confused. Boss Lynn's warm, professional smile seemed to contain a special power that made people feel extremely friendly and gentle. Wanting to confide in her, Lynn G smiled kindly and thought, if you can achieve propaganda effect, then there is nothing better. If not, then that's it, at least you can develop a customer. New products. Lynn G's eyes only saw money. He thought, my Lynn family opened a small bookstore here just because it can make people happy. Hoping to see smiles of everyone. Absolutely not for a few coins. And Lucy was on this side listening to Lynn G's narration and silently thinking, unexpectedly in this situation I suddenly became the target of the bookstore owner wanting to help. But most importantly, I'm really feeling tired right now because of my work. Has the bookstore owner noticed? She thought about the scene where she had to work extremely hard, dealing with a bunch of employees, and secretly thought, recently because the White Wolf and the Scarlet Cult have caused trouble everywhere. The entire logistics department has been busy to the hilt, not touching the ground. Every day I racked my brains trying to cover up each battle. I, as the deputy dean, also felt an extreme headache. All the logistics support for the front line. Not only the support, the material aspect of ensuring that the fight has no consequences later is also our responsibility. Lucy had an extremely headache and thought to herself, I was temporarily dispatched here at this critical moment to evaluate the situation of this Class 1 sector for the Elder Council's reference. After thinking, Lucy raised her voice and said, I. And Lynn G smiled victoriously, thinking in her heart, success. This reaction seems to have worked. Lynn G pointed at Lucy and said, it's still the same sentence. No need to be surprised. So, about what you said just now, do you plan to take responsibility for everything that happens out there? Lucy replied, of course. She patted her chest and assuredly said, we must take responsibility in this aspect. Otherwise things will become extremely troublesome. Even though I'm very busy, this is my responsibility. Lynn G's eyes stared at Lucy, thinking, it seems like her company is determined to win. The requirements for employees like you are also very high. Right, she is an executive officer. Tra should be in charge of questions for a large area. You can get more accurate answers by going door to door. But just thinking about it makes my heart stop. It must feel awful to be a corporate slave. Lin Ji raised his voice and began his psychological manipulation job. He said, "Poor child." Behind Lin Ji, it was as if there was a halo of light shining. He said, "If you don't mind, you can rest. Stay here for a moment. Read a book." Little Lucy, holding a teddy bear in her hand, looked bewildered at everything before her eyes. In Lucy's eyes, her blue pupils could only see two colors clearly. Black and white. That is good and evil. When I was young, I vaguely discovered that the world in my eyes and others was not the same. Only in my eyes was this world clearly black and white. Then hey, I just learned that this is called the spiritual talent of domination. This type of talent makes you have an innate sensitivity to good and evil. And also of course makes you be seen as a bad person by those around you. Shunned by enemies. Little Lucy had to endure countless malicious gossips from adults, saying, "What's wrong with that child?" They criticized, because she has such natural talent. You can arbitrarily criticize others as evil people. This is so disgusting. What kind of joke is that? So nauseating. Children like this understand what good and evil are. No, who does it think it is? Is it evil to say people are evil? They used every word to pierce the little girl's heart who didn't understand anything. That's it. I don't think she's a good person at all. It's really disturbing. I hate it. Let's stay away from it for a bit. Little Lucy hugged the teddy bear tightly in her arms and backed away in fear. Suddenly a pair of hands appeared from nowhere. Placed on the shoulders of little Lucy accompanying her was the voice of someone. What a talented person. The man squatting in a white shirt, his face hidden in the dark, said to little Lucy, "Having talent like this can still be difficult. Go to the Tower of Secret Rites. Work effectively, then the interests of our family will be even more solid." The other person seemed to manipulate little Lucy's psychology. He said, "You have the blood of a Harry. Do you know what the hawks do when it's time for their children to leave the nest?" The other person spoke right into little Lucy's ear and said with a voice like a devil, "They will push her child down from a very high cliff." Little Lucy's figure seemed to fall into endless darkness, leaving only the little girl and the other man's voice. The other man's voice still echoed, "Useless. Useless animals with only one ending, death." The other person touched little Lucy's face with tears in her eyes and said, "So you must be effective." "It's for me." The other person's eyes flashed in the darkness, "This is because of myself," meaning people living in this world have to do the right thing. "Are you right?" Little Lucy shed tears and tremblingly replied, "Yes. That's right." The man immediately stood up and separated from her. To the little girl, he said, "Good, you can go." And he turned and left, instructing little Lucy, "Go pack your luggage yourself. Then I will send someone to find you." He stuck out his tongue and licked his thumb, saying, "That's right. There's one more thing to do. Emphasis a bit." The man turned and left, leaving behind only a shadow and the final words, "In the future. Don't let me get too far away from you." At that time little Lucy was extremely scared and went to meet that man. Her little feet in pink slippers cut off her voice and said, "Yes, sir." And that was also the moment started a series of exhausting days. Then, I joined the Tower of Secret Rites. Under the arrangement of the head of the family, I was assigned to the logistics department, which was always busy. With my talent, I've completed many dangerous missions. My standing in the tower has been steadily increasing, but no one has ever said a word of consolation to me. No one has ever admired my achievements. Everyone is first. After all, maintain a distance from someone like me who possesses a talent that can see through good and evil. So I understand, the important thing is not who you are at all, but the talent that is extremely beneficial to you. Tower of Secret Rites. As for who I am, no one has ever cared and no one will care. Lucy will be like a wooden puppet controlled by someone holding strings. Even though she knows that people like her are not, I have the right to think like that. But sometimes I can't help but think that. Lucy's eyes are bewildered and she asks herself, what is the meaning of living in this world? At that time through the screen, this is the new mission that the Elder entrusted to you. Deputy Head Carolyn, please go to Level 1 Area Number 0113 to conduct a recording. Assessment and observation at a distance. Close separation. Judging the identity of the bookstore owner. Good or evil purpose. Real strength. Those were the busy times in her countless jobs. When she received new tasks. Only when contacted me the new elder used this redundant method. Just like I thought this was a new mission as troublesome and dangerous as. The elder through the screen told Lucy, you know, entrusting you with such an important task is because you believe in your work attitude and ability. You must try your best to complete file 0113 and provide evidence for the elder's judgment. Lucy then silently listened to the elder's announcement and agreed. Even if she wanted to refuse, she couldn't. It's okay, I'm used to this kind of treatment. This is just what I should have. I understand. Same as before, just need to complete the next task. Lucy pushed the door into the room and started searching for data. She thought to herself, in area level 1 number 0113, there exists a god-level powerhouse. There is no accurate data before contact. So you need to prepare. Completely thoughtful, Lucy was wearing her pajamas at home, typing on the computer, thinking, in front of me, I have collected all the report files on level 1 area number 0113 that have been edited up to now. In short, look up the whole thing once first. Lucy had to stay up all night to work. She saw Joseph's report and thought, these are the original models provided by Lord Joseph, and also include recorded information about customers of the bookstore up to now. She looked at the tiny text on the screen and said, there are also a few discrete opinions and speculations left by other departments of the Tower of Secret Rights. After observing and reading for a while, Lucy concluded, so that's it. Synthesizing these documents will be able to summarize some of the behavioral logic of this god-level powerhouse. And Lucy has summarized a super long and detailed summary report. First of all, he is in this bookstore as an ordinary bookstore owner. And this bookstore will provide 3 types of services to customers every day. In the bookstore, including lending books, buying books, viewing books, as long as there is no ill will towards him or harboring doubts or thoughts of disrespecting him. He will not take action. In words, otherwise he won't personally attack. So Joseph's unfriendly attitude is just a coma. Secondly, he seems to possess unknown power. This is known from the dialogue between Destroying the Field of Truth Andrew and Sage Doris. So it's best not to think about hiding what's inside. And don't be so lucky as to think that you can hide your past. Lucy's eyes watched the screen without leaving. In the end, all the books in the store use taboo language to write unusually powerful books. Maybe the inherent power of these books is not strong at all. And it doesn't have to be solved at once. It will be done in a moment. But it must have been absolutely carefully selected by the bookstore owner. It can solve your problem at that time. This is his generous and selfless gift. What about those fees are not worth much compared to the value of the book? I think it is probably the same kind of interest of the bookstore owner. When he says that, it means you are completely satisfied. Already in the palm of his hand. Those were the conclusions that Lucy had drawn after countless reports. Just like now, Lynn G told her, sit down and read a book. Lucy was scared. She pursed her lips and swallowed her saliva, thinking, it's finally here. Her hand on her thigh trembled as she thought. The documents available about these books are not clear. This is also the most important purpose of my investigation. I must at least take notes. Received the power contained in a book and left it to the elders to judge. She sat silently on the chair. Her thoughts running endlessly said that she did not hold any expectations for what she did not know was false. But her feelings were excited. What is this feeling mixed with fear? Everything in front of our eyes becomes unreal. It seems to be covered under some kind of illusion. The soul seems to be robbed of everything by some higher level mystery. Everything Lucy's eyes now seemed completely distorted. She thought to herself, it's like there's something taboo that's luring me into some mystery. I don't know if I'm done thinking about it yet. But Lucy moving her lips she asked, can I see for myself? Lynn G hadn't said anything. But Lucy was startled and bewildered. Her eyes wide open, thinking, it's over. Why did she say it subconsciously? Lucy's whole body felt like she had fallen into a pan of hot oil. She thought, what if you don't? The bookstore was planning to recommend a certain book to me. But if I do this, I won't offend him, right? And Lynn G was on this side sipping a sip of tea thinking, it's okay. This guest has arrived. Lynn G smiled triumphantly, extremely proud of herself. 3 sentences that turn a market researcher with no intention of buying anything into a potential customer. The art of eating say this. It's really obvious to me. There's no need for me to say much more. This customer seems to really like reading books. I can see that clear touching expression in his expression and eyes. It's hers. Lin Ji's eyes glared at Lucy. He thought to himself, for someone who loves books, that thirst for knowledge cannot be hidden. Lin Ji glared, making Lucy not dare to move. While Lin Ji was still frantically thinking, compared to other people introducing themselves. Choosing a book you like is even more fun. I don't understand this kind of feeling. Is that so? We are doing a proper business. We have never forced anyone to buy or sell anything. This is all about using emotions to move the hearts and persuade customers to buy books. Lin Ji poured tea and smiled. He didn't pay any attention to Lucy but kept thinking. It's good to let the customer have a gentle mind and choose the book themselves. While Lucy was on the other side, looking at Lin Ji trembling and not daring to say anything. The pink tea was poured into a cup. Lin Ji happily thought, not to mention having to go to work on a rainy day like this is an extremely tiring job. Maybe having a relaxing, reasonable place to rest is absolutely extremely satisfying. Lin Ji rubbed her nose and thought, if you want to relax, you won't recommend books that are profound and difficult to understand. Let's adjust the type of book to be a suitable literary novel to read. Lin Ji elbowed her head down on the table. A black aura seemed to have eyes, covering all the books on the shelf. Gradually the black aura surrounding the books disappeared. The normal book titles turned into other names. Lin Ji put the teacup on the table and pushed it towards Lucy and said, if you want to choose yourself, of course you can. You can read these books as you please. Lin Ji continued to say, it's like a review task. There's no need to rush. Talk to me and read the books at your convenience. Isn't this also part of the job, yours? Lin Ji looked at Lucy and thought, this place is a bit alluring. During the research process, it may change the customer's mood a bit. They feel comfortable, maybe buy a few more books. Why, such an obvious hint. As a colleague, I'm sure you'll notice, right? That cup of tea was steaming hot. Lucy remained silent and said nothing. But the thoughts in her heart were already running crazy. It's clear that I really have the purpose of evaluation, and even the bookstore owner is extremely clear in his heart. But he is so tolerant and gentle towards me. No, without scolding me for my sudden request. The bookstore owner is really extremely friendly. Lin Ji gave a suggestion, but Lucy didn't catch that hint. She picked up the teacup and sipped her lips to drink. Standing up from the chair, her plump buttocks were exposed. Lucy thought, with great strength and indiscriminate kindness. No wonder Lord Joseph chose to hand over the magic sword to him. Basically, this evaluation will be able to make a judgment. Next, just choose one more book to complete the final task. Before Lucy left, Lin Ji added, oh right, the space in front of the desk in my bookstore is too small. There aren't many books. If you want to browse a little more, you can visit the stockpile in the back. Lin Ji raised her hand to invite her in. Lucy opened her eyes wide and didn't dare move. She looked inside as if she would fall into a deep hole if she stepped in. She thought to herself, there is a space like this inside the bookstore. The materials have never mentioned intelligence before. The door opened and made a squeaking sound. It was like darkness preparing to swallow Lucy, making her scared. Just looking inside made her feel like a black hole in the universe. But Lin Ji still said that, if you want to take a look, just feel free. Lucy's heart was pounding every time. When she saw the space in front of her, she thought, are you saying that no one has ever stepped foot in here before me? Why does the owner of the bookstore publicly reveal to me an unnamed field that has never been opened to anyone else? Lucy's hands holding tightly to her skirt trembled and asked herself, what does he want from me? It's okay to be excited for the moment. It's okay to have other meanings. Now I have no choice. I have no choice but to obey the bookstore owner's wishes. Lucy said tremblingly, thank you for your good intentions. Then I can only be rude. Lucy stepped on the floor and walked in, her eyes bewildered to see everything inside. Only seeing in front of her was a large space, covered in black with countless bookshelves lined up. Lucy looked around and thought, oh my dear, holy light, you call this a stockpile? Lucy was bewildered. She raised her hand and said, I swear even if I search all over Aza, I won't be able to find a library with a larger scale than this. This is clearly a powerful space, contained in no way compatible with the appearance of the bookstore. Presumably, large-scale spatial space folding spell was used. Lucy looked at the endless bookshelves and thought, Is it possible that this bookstore contains all the books and wisdom of the whole world? Lucy walked away. I thought to myself, every book in this place records taboo knowledge. If the bookstore owner publicly spreads the word about all of Nuo-jin, it will be. Lucy quickly interrupted her thoughts. No, too much rest and my spirit won't be able to handle it. Lucy was bewildered, sweating profusely. I randomly find a book that doesn't look too dangerous. Then quickly leave here. If I stay in here for a long time, I'm afraid I'll lose my reason. Lucy's heart was pounding. She looked at the names of the books on the shelf. Book of Death. Flower in the Secret Dreamland. Chasing Shadows of the Past. Lucy, after looking at the names of the titles of the books, hugged her chest, herself, one hand holding onto the bookshelf. She breathed non-stop and thought, just looking at the title of the book makes my heart race non-stop. She was breathing heavily, her heart was pounding, her thoughts were endless. Run, don't tell me to take it down and look at it. Just jotting down the title of the book will consume a lot of willpower. If there's no other way, you should still ask the bookstore owner to recommend a suitable book to you. She placed her hand on a bookshelf and sighed. Suddenly her eyes saw something. She saw a book that attracted her attention. She thought to herself, soul gazing. Her eyes opened wide, staring at the book, thinking, this is probably a book related to some kind of detective skills. Right, assessing the danger level of an event, an item, or a person belongs to the scope of work. For me, this is an extremely important ability. Lucy stared at that book. Behind her it seemed like there were a pair of eyes and a mouth waiting for her. Lucy thought to herself, should I choose this book? This feels like someone is whispering in my ear. Quote. Lucy reached out to take the book with the pink cover down from the shelf. Immediately her eyes opened wide. She fell into space. Right in front of her a large half-colored ball appeared. Red, half white. Lucy turned her head slightly, bewildered and wanted to scream but couldn't. She asked herself, what happened? I can't speak. Lucy walked on the ground with a constant rustling sound ringing in her ears in this thin red air. Hovering countless silhouettes of souls. The more she walked, the more scared she became. What is it? He just touched her glasses so hard that they fell to the ground and cracked. Blood flowed from her eyes. In the distance, two black figures appeared like a person taking his buffalo for a walk. So, Lucy's eyes were bleeding non-stop. She glanced over and saw only two figures in her eyes like black ink stains flowing out, and there were three eyes staring at her. Eyes. That black color emitted 7 colors of light. Lucy's bleeding eyes were glaring. Lucy was suspended by black ropes that tied her body tightly. A stream of black light stabbed straight into her right eye. She screamed but couldn't scream out. Her remaining eye saw the black shadow with a devilish smile. One of its hands held her eye. Lucy screamed loudly. Lucy sat down on the ground. Her heart beat faster. She thought, back. Just now were the things in the book. The soul. She trembled. It turned out the book she chose had been opened. Appeared and countless evil eyes and skulls appeared floating on the page. Lucy was scared. She gritted her teeth but couldn't make it out. It seemed like something had stabbed into her eyes. Lucy quickly pushed her glasses away and said, I have to quickly leave this place. Go find the bookstore owner. Lucy staggered away. A black liquid covered the bookshelf. It spread throughout the shelf. Book. Reveals a cover of a book called Soul Gazing, and another cover of a book called To Live. Outside the rain is pattering. In the bookstore Lynn is holding a cup of tea while drinking. Breathing in smoke. He smiled and thought, that's not bad. This development is really not bad. This is also the first time a customer proactively asked to see a stockpile of mine. I can still imagine the look on his face. She's so happy. Lynn inhaled the scent of tea and thought, a stockpile is the embodiment of my wish, containing the entire world's knowledge. For people who like to read, it must be. It's no different from heaven. Lyn's eyes flashed. She will absolutely be satisfied. At this moment, with a snap sound, Lucy with a sweaty face was breathing heavily and said, book. Is this book okay? Lucy put the book on the table and brought it in front of Lynn. The book's title was To Live. Lynn looked at the book, touched her chin and thought, to live. Books are really good, but melancholy words like this aren't very suitable for relaxation. Right? Suddenly Lyn's eyes twitched slightly when he saw Lucy's slightly tired reaction. He thought, As expected, this is not to mention relaxing to the point where the naked eye can see the level of fatigue has increased. Right, Lin Ji saw Lucy's tiredness and was scared. Lin Ji quickly stood up and said, "Are you okay? Oh, reading this kind of book is a bit uncomfortable at first. How do you feel now?" Lucy covered her eyes. There were still tendrils growing in her eyes. She said, "I'm fine." She whispered to him, "I see those souls. It really makes me a little, I'm sorry. I think I need to get used to it a bit." Lin Ji was a bit bewildered when he heard that. He narrowed his eyes and looked at Lucy, thinking, "That's really good, using your soul to call the characters in the book. It seems like I've really read it to the point that I'm immersed in it. And the level of understanding is also extremely deep." Lin Ji quickly helped Lucy sit down on the chair and said, "In short, sit down and rest for a while first. Flirt. How about chatting with me a few words?" Lin Ji thought to herself. Normally speaking, this situation is an extremely delicate mind. Easy to sympathize with, secondly because of my own deep experience. Immersed into the details of a certain character. Lin Ji stared at Lucy who was sitting there pushing her glasses thinking, for a strong-looking office lady like herself I fear it might be both. Lin Ji Ho and I closed my eyes and thought, if that's the case, then it's necessary to provide some after-sales service. This is also to consolidate money. I mean customers. I need to help them snap out of it. Soul-healing words. Come to me. Lin Ji coughed. Then he raised his voice and said, "Speaking of which, with your current situation, when you come into contact with this book for the first time, it's quite normal to be shocked." Lucy heard Lin Ji say that and raised her head to look at him. Lin Ji looked at her and explained in detail. "It's just that after you get used to it, you will feel a lot of benefits." Lucy heard that and her thoughts sank deeper. Looking at the situation, the owner of the bookstore is expressing his approval of my choice. Her eyes silently lowered, thinking, with my current state of mind, it's normal to be shaken. She silently lowered her head and thought, surely the root cause of this uncomfortable feeling is because I'm too weak and don't have enough strength to control it. Lucy put her hand on her chest and said, "You're right, I still haven't been able to fully absorb the truth in the book." Lin Ji turned away and said, "It's okay, there's no need to let it go. Thinking too much, this is not a bad thing." Lin Ji explained and said, "Empathy is human nature. All sentient beings suffer and we are all sentient beings. The world and we have what's the difference?" In Lucy's eyes, Lin Ji was like a god with red eyes looking at her and saying a slightly dark sentence, "The universe is a cruel, cold place. That's just the way it is." Lin Ji sat down in the chair behind the table and explained to Lucy. "But we live in a human society, so it's normal to hope that there will be a little more romantic love around. Right?" Hearing that, Lucy touched the book she had just chosen and thought, "All sentient beings suffer. I am moved. This feeling seems to have surpassed the emotions that normal humans possess." Lucy thought, which has led to the height of God. God loves the world. Lucy thought of Lin Ji standing with her arms crossed. And Doris kneeling on the ground. She thought, no. The owner of the bookstore was originally a god then. Isn't that right? Could it be possible to make the great sage spirit of the elf family loyal? She looked at Lin Ji who was smiling and observed carefully. She thought, this is not only because of strength growing strong, but even more so because of this great kindness and love for everyone alike. In Lucy Lin Ji's eyes, she was like a god emitting the light of truth. The great gods of the past were usually selfish, because they were first and foremost creatures of the god level, just used to portray them, only describing their great strength. But the bookstore owner is even closer to the essence of this assessment. Lucy's hand on the table trembled. She picked up the book and asked Lin Ji, "Is this the reason you did these things?" Lin Ji was confused, filled with questions, thinking, what am I doing? Is it just helping within the allowable capacity of the bookstore's customers? Thinking like that, Lin Ji immediately smiled again. You could say the same thing, he replied, revealing his 40 teeth. He explained, every time I try to understand the cause of my customers' suffering, I feel like I need to save them from the sea of suffering. Otherwise it would be too cruel. That's all. Lin Ji smiled. Her eyes flashed as she looked at Lucy like a bag of money, thinking, of course, while saving if they can conveniently save their money. Wouldn't it be better? The core of my personality is honest and enthusiastic. I'm someone who can't see others as bad. Lin Ji's whole person, as if emitting the light of the righteous path. He thought to himself, he was born in heaven and cannot be changed. Lynn G put the teacup on the table and reached out to Lucy, smiling and closing her eyes, saying, "But there's no need to see what's going on. I'm not that great. Only with this heart you can do the same thing." And Lucy looked at Lynn G with bewildered eyes. She thought to herself, with this heart I can do it too. This insinuation has another profound meaning. Could it be that the owner of the bookstore saw my ability? Lucy and Lynn G sat facing each other in the room, like a negotiation with a green light. Lucy looked at Lynn G and thought, "I want me to support his arrangements within the Tower of Secret Rites." Quote. Lucy was startled by her guess and thought, "So, after understanding my purpose for coming here, he started threatening me, and then willing to treat me as a customer." In Lucy Lynn G's eyes, she was like a calculating person, a god who knew everyone's thoughts in advance. She thought, "I even allowed myself to see where that wisdom was hidden. Everything was a closely linked conspiracy." Lynn G's eyes stared at Lucy. Lucy sat still, not daring to move. Her hands placed on her thighs seriously like a student. She thought, "But now it's time for me to show my attitude. Since I started there was no way for me to resist at all." Her hands were clasped tightly on her thighs. At this moment, it was as if there was a black aura with a human silhouette touching her face from behind. She thought, "It's a little bit disgusting. It reminds me of unhappy memories." Lucy's face sank into darkness. She placed her hand on her chest and said, "Do you think I'm suitable to do these things?" Lynn G smiled as if he had achieved his wish. He looked at Lucy and thought, "Okay, this bowl of chicken soup is not bad." Customers started to actively ask questions. "Had an idea. I think there will be some advice and suggestions." Lynn G tapped her fingers on the table, thinking, it's just whether her way of describing is appropriate or not. Not what to do. Lynn G touched chin, pondered, this proves that she still has subjective thoughts. Subconsciously denies herself, uses other people's behavior as reference for her actions. Lynn G looked at Lucy and evaluated, after all, we're colleagues. It's not unusual for psychological problems to arise. But the specific cause requires a bit of probing with the art of speaking. Finished analyzing the problem, Lynn G raised her voice and said, "This is not a matter of whether it's appropriate or not. What matters is how you view yourself." Lynn G raised her hand and said to Lucy, "Have you ever thought about why? Have you ever doubted yourself like this again?" Lucy's eyes opened wide. She stammered, "I." Lynn G pointed at Lucy's face and said, "The basic reason is because of the job. The nature of the job will give you many opportunities. Exposed to tribulations in this world more than ordinary people." He explained, "Faced with tribulations, people's hearts will naturally have compassion. This is a good virtue that deserves to be praised." Said it was praiseworthy, but Lynn G said, "But mercy may help others, but there is no way to save yourself." Lynn G put her hands on the table and looked at Lucy opposite. "In this situation, the stronger your ability, the more empathy you have, the more painful it will be." Lynn G's eyes flashed as he said, "That's why you're depressed about your current job. And at the same time doubting your character. Important to myself." Lucy's eyes flashed. Her hands on her thighs clenched tightly. She thought, completely being seen through by the owner of this bookstore. Lucy imagined herself sitting on one of the angel's wings. She thought, my bloodline and talent help me complete all kinds of tasks. Lucy seemed to fall into the deep sea naked, thinking, I finally became. The chain around Lucy's neck was stretched. Countless pairs of hands were holding that chain and controlling her like a puppet. Lucy was silent and did not speak, and she was sitting there under the control of countless hands holding the chain tightly. Lynn G looked at Lucy and thought, it's not much different from what I thought. This customer is burdened by work and work. Once controlled, because of their confirmed ability, they misunderstand that work is their own meaning, which is truly a common psychological problem of capitalist henchmen. Lynn G remembered Burton and thought, this type is not the same as Burton. Simply changing the environment won't have any effect. The important thing is to let her realize her own worth. Lynn G, she raised her chin and said, that's why it makes sense for you to rely on your own will to choose this book. The premise is that you can read and understand the profound details behind this book. Lucy asked in bewilderment. Lynn G recounted his story. I was once fortunate enough to see a revival of a glorious ancient civilization. And to this day I still often remember the past. Poor people. The people who opened up heaven and earth were able to survive in a remote place, but did not feel happiness and joy for even a second. Lin Ji explained, and the book in her hand was a precious part of great civilization. That's it. Lucy looked at the book bewildered. Lin Ji continued, the greatest characteristic of civilization is perseverance. The origin of this perseverance is rooted in the deepest place of every soul. For courage and stubbornness to survive. Lucy was startled by Lin Ji's words. Lin Ji said, this is exactly what you need right now. Lucy picked up the book and looked at it. Could it be that the souls in this book? Lin Ji said with a smile, that's right. They are all real. In other words, they really existed. Lucy was bewildered. She thought to herself, it's too shocking, condensing thousands of souls into the book. What level of mysterious and unpredictable power is this? But the bookstore owner has also witnessed the historical development of an entire civilization. This is a hint. Lucy clenched her hands and thought, no, this does not need to be considered deeply. The bookstore owner gave the book like this for me. This proves. Lucy hesitated and asked, what do you mean? The current situation is not as bad as I thought. But this book can help me. Right? Lin Ji heard that and thought to herself. Very good. I understand as soon as I say it. Talking to a smart person. Of course, there's no need to be too blunt. Everyone understands. Lin Ji pushed the other book towards Lucy and said, that's right. What I want to say is that this book is suitable for you now. Read it. Once you understand this book, you will be able to make up for the things you are currently lacking. Lin Ji placed her hand on the book and explained, when you get out of the bottom of the endless abyss of life, when all external forces cannot be used anymore, humans must grasp the final limit. What is their name? How to complete the test of life? Lucy's eyes opened big, through each of Lin Ji's words. Lin Ji said, you always misunderstand one point. The hand placed on Lucy's thigh trembled. Lin Ji said, what's really important is not what you call. Lucy's whole body was shocked. Lucy seemed to see golden light emanating from Lin Ji's body. It seemed to blind her eyes. Accompanied by a voice. By Lin Ji, I personally recommend separating everything outside of yourself. Your soul, for yourself, to continue living, to experience more and more things. Gradually weaving your own life. From there, the spirit gradually returns to calm. Lucy seemed to fall into the illusion of the soul again. The scene of the man leading the buffalo following Lin Ji's words word by word. The silhouette of the soul and the buffalo gradually dissolving into smoke. Lin Ji was still saying, heart, spirit of calmness, the will to let go of all negative thoughts and stubbornness. All the souls that surrounded Lucy. Through Lin Ji's explanation, she understood and they gradually disappeared and no longer clung to her. More. Lin Ji said, it's also about having your own soul face to face in abundance. Only then can you truly reconcile with yourself. Mature Lucy seemed to step towards little Lucy holding a tattered teddy bear. Little Lucy's injured face looked at grown-up Lucy. Grown-up Lucy walked step by step closer to little Lucy. Lin Ji said, at that time you can tell yourself that. Grown-up Lucy Than hugged little Lucy in her arms. Tears welling up. Lin Ji's voice and her voice merged into one. Lin Ji said, it's been so hard before. Thank you for coming to this world. Little Lucy hugged adult Lucy. The cracks opened and everything gradually fell apart. The dream paper that had been clinging to Lucy for half of her life cracked. Lin Ji said, you deserve to be proud of yourself. Everything is broken. Lucy has escaped from her long dream. She still hears Lin Ji's voice echoing, these things are also the meaning of life in my eyes. Lucy's tears flowed down. She tremblingly said, the meaning of survival. Lin Ji saw Lucy's tears flowing out and was bewildered. Her mouth opened wide and thought to herself, how can you say that to make people cry? This child normally lacks love. I love it so much. Only a few sentences of chicken soup have the appearance of being cheap. But I can cry like this. Lin Ji shyly said to Lucy, are you okay? If you can't accept it, there's no need to force yourself too much. Lucy raised her hand to wipe her tears. Gave a bright, sincere smile, it's okay. I'm fine. This book is extremely good. Thank you for your advice. I quickly got used to it without any problems. Lin Ji heard that and breathed a sigh of relief. Said with relief, it seems you have combined your actual situation and gained enlightenment. This is a good thing. Do you understand what you have to do in the future? Lucy once again put on her glasses. Smiled. placed her hand on her chest and said to Lynn, I understand. I will try my best to understand this book properly, so that it can promote its effectiveness. From now on, I will use everything I have for you to use. I will absolutely not disappoint your expectations. A certain Jiksu also offered everything to Lynn, who was on the other side in a daze, open, in his heart. And when Lynn heard what Lucy said, he got 3 points. He smiled so hard that he wanted to bleed. His mind was in a storm. After a while of not understanding Lucy's brain circuit, Lynn chose giving up his thoughts. He smiled and said, don't draw conclusions too soon. After paying for the book, Lucy took the book and waved to leave. Lynn also waved goodbye to her and said, returning slowly. Slowly, explaining and thinking about her business. Her life will be bright and fresh. The door closes. He says he hopes to see you again. Lucy covered her umbrella and stepped out into the rain. After she sent a text message through her phone. The phone informed her that the message had been sent successfully. Lucy took off her glasses. At this moment her eyes turned white. She saw something. Saw in the distance countless purple streams of air rushing towards Lucy. But it didn't harm her. It just surrounded her. Lucy whispered and said, this is the power of the soul to stop seeing. To be able to look straight into the essence of the soul. Without discrimination. To observe and evaluate the true information carved on the soul. In Lucy's eyes as if seeing her own shadow. She said, because I use my own soul, I can't see other souls. So as long as my own soul becomes strong, I can observe more and more information. More thoroughly. Lucy thought as she walked. In the past, I only used my talent to complete the job. But now Boss Lynn gives me pointers. I hope I can use this ability to get the job done. Same thing as him. In the distance there was a falcon perched on a pillar looking at Lucy. Lucy's eyes lit up. She said, this expectation really makes me loved but scared. Can do. Boss Lynn's eyes are the greatest honor. But Lucy also secretly cried 2 tears in her heart. But the feeling of having countless sticky tentacles gouge out my eyes and then replace them with a new one. I never want to experience it again in my whole life. She glanced at the bookstore and smiled. When I was young, someone told me that when an eagle leaves its nest, it will be pushed into the abyss. And the weak can only be crushed to pieces. But that's not true. That's right. Regardless of whether they are strong or weak. As long as their life is still there. In the moment of their wings. They will once again have a new life. Lucy held the file in her hand and looked at Joseph opposite. Saying, up there is the result of my evaluation report for the owner of this bookstore. Based on the results of this investigation, the Elder Association finally admitted its failure. So we request your transfer has been officially approved by the Elder Council. Joseph looked cold, crossed his arms and said, it's a good thing to be so troublesome. Those old fossils can be considered seeing the truth clearly. Outside the rain was pattering. Inside the voice was still echoing, now. It's time for the Tower of Secrets rights to face reality. Only by cooperating with that Mr. Lynn can we protect the peace of Nuo Jin. Lucy's eyes flashed and she said, only you can convince us of these words. Lucy looked at Joseph over there with his arms crossed. His stern face emitting a green light and said, after all, I've never seen anyone as pure and righteous as you in the tower. Joseph frowned uncomfortably and said, I'm not that clean. This is the formal attire of Radiant Knights. The other knights are dressed up in all white attire like this too. Lucy said helplessly, that's not what I meant. Lucy looked at Joseph and said, in the future perhaps the Elder Council will officially restore your position as a great knight commander. You must will become the example of the knights. Joseph's face was reflected in the mirror. He raised his hand and said to Lucy, in short, give me the document approving the transfer request first. Later I will provide additional reports to the Elder Council. Didn't know there was someone hiding behind that wall over there, listening to these 2 people talking. Lucy smiled and gave the report to Joseph and said, then I should say goodbye. Wish you a smooth work. Joseph held the report and asked, how was it? Looking at Lucy's back, Joseph seemed to understand the problem and asked, after being helped by that great man, did you feel like your whole body lit up? Lucy was startled. She turned her head slightly, glanced at Joseph and said, do you still need to say? Lucy turned her head and placed her hand on her chest. Her bouncy hair could clearly be seen wearing a very sexy outfit today. She smiled brightly and said, he gave me a new life. Joseph bloomed. As expected, smile. After Lucy's figure walked away, Joseph scratched his head and said, I've already discussed the work here. No matter what you want to do, it's not too late. Come out quickly. A figure hiding behind slightly shyly poked its head out. Claude shyly said, You've discovered me. Teacher. Claude walked out and scratched his head and said to Joseph, Just now the training department sent an important document that needs your signature. I found out that you were discussing something here, so I wanted to wait until you finished discussing it and then come find you. Quote, Lucy over here is smiling with her eyes closed at the staff. Joseph on this side looked at Claude and said, Stop acting like a little disciple. My sly Claude, you are the one who was taught by me. Do you think I still don't know? Joseph scratched Claude's head and said, If it was really an important document, you would have told me right away. So, are you interested in the sudden changes in the Deputy Chief of Logistics? Claude looked at Lucy with admiring eyes and said, Indeed, the previous night Carolyn always had a halo on her body. Strangers should not come close. Everyone was very serious. Claude looked at Lucy as she spoke, joking with other employees saying, But now it seems like she has turned into a different person. Staying with her for a long time will make people feel comfortable. It's been a long time since I've felt this kind of presence in the tower. Claude's eyes were a bit nostalgic. Last time, it was Daria the Great Knight who. Saying this, suddenly Claude was startled and frightened. Claude immediately looked at Joseph and said, I'm sorry, teacher. I didn't mean it. Joseph's face turned black. He remained silent. Joseph released his hand holding Claude's head, crossed his arms, and said to Claude with a black face, Don't think so much. Now give me the documents that need to be signed. And besides, you don't have to waste your time. Time to be your beloved teacher. Right? Joseph gave a mysterious smile and said, Thinking back, I waited so long in vain for the opportunity to confess. This really stupid little disciple. Claude's face turned red. He stammered and quickly waved his hand and said to Joseph, Teacher, what are you saying? I didn't mean it at all. How could I say such embarrassing words? We should at least be friends. First, Joseph patted Claude's shoulder and said, No matter what you want to say to anyone, the important thing is to say it first. Joseph said with a smirk, There are some words, if said at times, shouldn't say. Joseph remembered his wife's figure in his memory. Told Claude, You will definitely regret it later. Claude turned his head to look at Joseph and called, Teacher. Joseph hummed the song while waving goodbye to Claude and said, In short, try your best. If you fail, then I'll let you transfer to the logistics department. You have to handle it yourself. Claude looked at Joseph's back as he left. But Joseph had gone away and only Claude was standing still without moving. Claude was breathing heavily, shaking his head and patting his face thinking, I understand. The teacher is using his way to think for me. Before because of shyness, I still don't dare to approach her. Now I must grasp this rare opportunity. Claude encouraged himself and thought, Come on, be brave, Claude. You can do it with honor. In anticipation of Great Knight Joseph's glory, he must successfully tell her, no matter what, he cannot confess his love at the first meeting. That would be too rude. Even the teacher is not cruel. To the point that if I don't confess, I will actually be sent to the logistics department. Claude pursed his lips, his cheeks reddening, thinking, that's about it. In short, you have to stay calm and try to build a basic relationship. A strand of Claude's hair stood up thinking, that's right. Even if it's not like that. Naturally, through starting a conversation you absolutely cannot reveal your true feelings and thoughts. Had finished giving himself courage, Claude approached Lucy and called out, I'm sorry, Lucy Caroline, Dean. Lucy turned her eyes to Claude. In Lucy's eyes, Claude was white and stammering, I am Claude's disciple, of the Great Knight Joseph, hoping to compare with you the losses related to the actions of the White Wolves and Scarlet Cult previously. No, I don't know if you have time. Quote. One of Lucy's eyes opened wide to look at Claude. The thoughts in Claude's heart appeared right before her eyes, like you. Honest, excited, she is looking at me. My favorite beauty. Please talk to me. Lucy's face turned red. Lucy quickly turned away shyly and stammered, that. Claude the Knight. Right. Lucy's ears turned red and said, I've finished editing the damage report related to before. That's it. If you don't mind, please come to my office. Claude's eyes lit up and asked, really? That would be great. Claude seemed to have a foxtail waving behind his back and 2 ears above her head. Smiling happily and thinking in her heart, okay. successfully talked to her, while Lucy in the front also walked away with a red face. Claude thought with satisfaction, moreover. It didn't reveal anything. I really like her. It's all so natural. On this side, the door to a room was pushed open. Yellow light flooded in. A pair of feet walked in. Joseph stood looking at the Candela Sword in front of him, whispering the name, Daria. Turned around, going back to the past a bit. Someone called out, Joseph. A muscular man, wiping sweat with black hair and healthy skin. Was Abraham Joseph in his youth? One of the great taboos. Kwang Wee. A red-haired girl called out. Sure enough, you're here. The red-haired girl revealed her beautiful, charming face with beautiful blue pupils. Raised 3 fingers and said, I have to go on a new mission. I'll take care of dinner myself. Where's Melissa? No, with you. This red-haired beauty is Abraham Daria, one of the great knights. Joseph's wife. Joseph wiped his sweat and looked at his wife and said, I just trained Melissa a set of swords. Magic. She's back in her bedroom. Now she's probably falling into a beautiful dream. Baby Melissa is sinking into a beautiful dream. Now lying next to her teddy bear. Dreaming about a nightmare and crying. Raise your hand and slash from above. Cut your body down. I don't remember how difficult these moves are. On this side, Daria approached Joseph. When standing next to Joseph, she saw the small figure of Daria. She said, he trained her well. But don't be too strict. Melissa is still young and you have to let her rest. Rest and relax. Joseph glanced at his wife, who was wearing a slightly red dress, and said, Oh, is that so? But our dear Melissa has told her mother herself. The training is too strict and I hope she will return soon. I've become a true knight. So I really hate my mother's arrival. Daria's face looked a bit embarrassed and she said, Oh, like that. Having said that, it's been a long time since I trained Melissa. I'll have to make up for it next time. Little Melissa on the other side was sleeping. Her face wrinkled in fear. Joseph said with his hands on his hips, smiling blindly, to Daria, this baby Melissa is still lacking in training. When I was as big as her. Before finishing the sentence, Joseph's face was thrown with a towel. Daria's voice echoed, Okay. Great genius knight of I, the time for boasting is over. Daria closed one eye and stuck out her tongue playfully and said to Joseph, People have long known that you are the strongest and most glorious knight of the era. So there is no need to exaggerate your achievements. Where is your greatness? Daria laughed at Joseph and said, What a pity, Joseph. You're so strong you can't even cook rice. Joseph looked at his wife and said, Hey, he argued to his wife. Speaking of which, I know how to cook. It's just that no one eats the rice I cook. And moreover, if I cook delicious rice in the future when my daughter gets married, won't I have to cook rice for other men to eat? I don't care. Daria hugged Joseph's arm and said, Dear, you think too far. Melissa is still a child. Don't worry, I'm here. Your daughter's future marriage will not bother you. Heart. Joseph glanced and said, That's right. It's related to my mission this time. Suddenly Joseph's eyes widened. Joseph fell to the ground. Daria quickly said with concern, Are you okay, Joseph? Again, Joseph sat down on the ground with wide eyes and said, Lately it's been more frequent than before. Curse this affliction. Daria concernedly told Joseph, Don't talk. You lie on the sofa first while I go prepare hot water for a massage. Joseph said, Yeah, okay. A basin of hot water was brought. Daria dipped 2 fingers in the water, took the water and rubbed Joseph's head. Joseph sat back in the chair enjoying Daria's massage. Daria asked, Do you feel more comfortable? No. Joseph replied, It's much better. Thank you, Daria. Your skills are getting better and better. Daria said with a slightly sad face. Even you can't suppress the curse of the demon sword Candela. This curse of unknown origin has already buried countless glorious knights. If we take advantage of this time to gnaw on it, it's still not serious. Joseph smiled and smiled at Daria. Don't think too much. The person who inherited the magic sword is not an easy person to tease. If this curse only corrodes me, that's enough. The ability to save the lives of more people. Then I am willing to bear it. Daria's face was a bit sad. Daria stood behind Joseph and said in a sad voice, If you keep like that. Joseph. Joseph opened his eyes and looked at his wife and said, Death is not scary. What's scary is seeing a crime happen and being powerless. Joseph said seriously, As a great knight, you must persevere, maintain righteousness in your heart. Possessing this ability must shoulder the corresponding responsibility. Joseph raised his arm and said, now I have no other choice. I just need to be able to set an example for myself. Meaning, and at the same time take good care of you and Melissa. I have nothing left to wish for. Daria remained silent without responding. She withdrew her hand that was stroking Joseph's head. Her voice said sadly, if there is a day that can solve, decided to curse this. Daria looked at Joseph, who was tilting his head. Until then it has nothing to do with justice. I hope you can make the right choice. Her blue pupils stared at Joseph, said, not for others but for yourself. Daria's eyes were very determined as she bowed her head and said, I really hope the person I love doesn't need to shoulder so much. I hope you can live for myself. Joseph clenched his fist, it's okay. Even if I have to carry all this forever. I'm not afraid. Joseph smiled and showed his white teeth. Joseph winked one eye and turned his head, looked at Daria behind. Because you're by my side. The curse of the demon's sword isn't that scary. After listening, Daria's face turned red and she remained silent. Then she hugged the back of the chair face down and said, I'm tired, so let's rest a bit. Joseph was bewildered and didn't understand. And Daria buried her face in her elbow. Whispered, really, suddenly saying these words is too cunning. This great night is breaking the rules. Joseph was in the back with his head confused and full of questions. Joseph raised his hand to rub Daria and called out, Daria. Joseph lifted Daria's face. His face came close to Daria's blushing face and said, do you have a fever? Daria quickly avoided the embrace and said, this guy. Really? Daria looked at Joseph and shouted, you casually say embarrassing things like that to tease people. Then you pull this surprise attack. Not giving them time to rest. Do you want to kill me? Daria punched Joseph in the chest, except for being strong and handsome. The rest are idiots. Joseph quickly shouted, what's wrong? Don't use force to hit people. It hurts. It hurts. Daria shouted, never mind. I can't be the only one who's embarrassed about what happened today. Then in front of Joseph's surprised eyes, Daria hugged Joseph's face and said, I want you now. Here, say I love you. In Joseph's gaze, Daria's face was red with tears. The corners of his eyes were still extremely creepy. Joseph also blushed. Joseph shouted loudly, why are you suddenly saying that? How can you say such embarrassing words? Daria is still like any other wife. She pursed her lips, turned into a lion, looked at Joseph and said, huh. Joseph was a little scared at the sight of his wife's angry eyes. He quickly coughed and said, really? Yes. Joseph turned back shyly and said, I'll tell you when I return from completing the mission. Daria quickly walked up to Joseph and asked, really? Don't lie. Before we got married, I promised you once, but I didn't say the final result. Joseph said a little shyly, his voice shaking slightly, say, this time for sure. Daria remained silent, not regretting Joseph anymore, but she lifted her legs up in Joseph's wide eyes, kissed him once. After making Joseph blush and tremble, Daria turned away and said, Miss, I will trust you once again. I'm going to carry out my mission. Daria got dressed, went in and waved goodbye to Joseph. Don't forget, you have to tell me later. I'll advance the reward. She smiled and said to Joseph, not this time. Flip magic. Joseph coughed, okay, won't forget. Joseph waved goodbye to Daria and said, go home quickly. Joseph used his mechanical hand to touch the mirror. His old face was reflected in the mirror. His mouth whispering, these past few years I've often thought. Joseph looked up and said, if I could have been by your side that day, maybe the outcome wouldn't have turned out like that. So, Joseph reached out to take the sword, but time cannot be turned back. At that time we had no other choice. Joseph held the sword in his hand. His face serious, this time I will make a choice for myself. Joseph's mouth smiled, his eyes full of nostalgia for the promise that came many years late. Joseph said, I love you. Daria. It was raining heavily outside. In the bookstore, Lynn G was reclining reading a list of books to borrow. When she saw something, Lynn G's eyes widened slightly, huh? When he saw Wilde's photo on the pad of paper, he said, this time old Wilde has returned the book. I don't know when he'll come to borrow it again. And I don't know if he'll handle Charles's problem well. Looked again, looking at Ji Jishu's picture. Lin Ji said again, the two books borrowed by Ji Jixu are almost due to be returned. But perhaps this eldest lady is in no danger of not returning them. Even if she doesn't return them, it's probably not a good idea. There's danger, don't pay. Looked at Melissa's image again and said, Melissa, I don't know how much this child has accomplished. I hope I can make some progress and not go to the point of doing something wrong. The person who devises tricks and obediently experiences knowledge is true strength. Lin Ji touched her face and thought, if anyone is overdue, we must pay attention to the person who has a problem with the book. If necessary, come to the door. Asking for compensation is also considered an outdoor exercise. But unfortunately, up to now, this type of obnoxious customer has not appeared. Lin Ji thought of Wild giving a gift. And Doris also gave a gift. Thinking, on the contrary, good books are like Wild. Doris, and you know how to bring some specialties to me. Lin Ji looked at the statue until it trembled. He thought to himself, if it's the person who has a problem, I'm willing to provide some help. But the book still has to be returned. Not even in a bookstore. It's not an easy thing. Lin Ji turned to look at the picture of Joseph and thought. Joseph is a retired soldier. There is no need to worry about returning books. Last time I also asked him to have do you want to unlock Master Lin's psychological tutoring function? Leave your psychological troubles to me to solve. Lin Ji tapped her fingers on the table and thought. Even though he didn't agree at that time. Yes, this can also be considered as burying a seed that can make the other person a long-term customer. Lin Ji said with a mysterious smile, seeing that at that time he still liked the little prince very much. Odds are really high. There really can't be Melissa. This kid is easy to trick. Convince. Persuade to dig money. It can't be ignored. ... A certain rose opened its eyes and glanced at Lin Ji and then 3 dots. Lin Ji laughingly said, inducing patriarchy is also an effective method of consumption. After thinking about it, Lin Ji stretched her arms and said, okay. After Lin Ji finished stretching, Lin Ji's face turned back to sullen and he said, so boring. Lin Ji thought of Lucy's face and thought to herself, the big live book that beautiful, super sexy girl borrowed was 3 days overdue. In the past, the bookstore often didn't have any customers. For a few months. But perhaps it's a contrast due to the recent increase in customers like an artesian well. A while ago there were no customers. And we could talk but now it's so quiet. I want to talk so much. At this time, Lin Ji was sighing and suddenly opened his eyes. He looked towards the door. He saw Joseph holding his sword and pushed the door in. Lin Ji's eyes lit up. He stood up and called, Joseph. I just thought that you were about to return the book. Joseph looked at Lin Ji and said, I'm ashamed to say it. Recently I was interrupted by some trivial matters so I had time to return the book. Joseph looking at Lin Ji said, it seems you've been waiting for a long time. The two faced each other. Joseph placed the Candela Sword on the table in front of Lin Ji. Joseph said, this is my decision. Lin Ji aimed his eyes and head were full of questions. He was extremely confused and thought, this is your decision. What decision? Lin Ji looked at the sword. For the first time he felt like he didn't understand anything. He thought to himself, you probably don't have to follow Mr. Wild's example of this trend. You're planning on coming to give away specialties. Right? Joseph took the book and bowed slightly to Lin Ji and said, thank you for your generosity. This book is very useful to me. Joseph put the book on the table and said, it's really a great fairy tale. Lin Ji took the book and thought to herself, of course. After all, this is the little prince who asked if the story was good or not. Of course it would be great. Lin Ji signed in Joseph's place, paid. Joseph looked at Joseph in front of him and said, in your good mood it seems this book is really useful to you during this time. Joseph raised his hand and smiled explaining to Lin Ji, it makes me miserable my strength has decreased a lot. Giving me unprecedented relief at this time. Thank you very much. Joseph's eyes said seriously, that's why I can be determined like this. Lin Ji closed her eyes tightly. Her mouth still smiling, but in her mind she was extremely confused. Thinking, so what did you decide? Indeed, last time I told you to hand over your troubles and burdens. You gave it to me in your heart. Lin Ji stared at the sword on the table and thought. But what do you want to directly hand me such a precious sword? Lin Ji's eyes were full of doubt. Lin Ji looked at Joseph as if the fire of determination was burning. Silently thinking, very well. This old man's eyes are filled with determination and relaxation. Head Lin Ji thought full of wonder. It seems, he is not joking. From previous contact he is not someone who knows how to joke. Handing this long sword to me, is probably Joseph's answer. Lin Ji raised her hand to touch the sword and thought. Look closely. This sword is extremely gorgeous. Not to mention the value of gold and gems engraved on this sword. It can also be shaped as a whole. Even a person, outside the industry, seeing it is startling because of its technology. Lin Ji commented, this seems to be a ceremonial sword. Lin Ji gave a wry smile. Looking at the sword, in normal circumstances perhaps no one would carry a sword like that into battle. Right, if they weren't careful, they would damage it. Lin Ji thought of Melissa again. Although that child Melissa's nature is stubborn, her behavior is good, just not like a girl raised by a normal family. Lin Ji began to think in her heart, so this sword symbolizes Joseph's past of responsibility and honor from the previous army. That can explain where the strong sense of righteousness from his body comes from. Lin Ji's eyes lit up. If the family educates him from a young age, then it is completely reasonable. Lin Ji looked at Joseph's serious face in front of him thinking, now Joseph wants to give me this sword, this means. Lin Ji stood up thinking, maybe he intends to let go of everything carrying on your back. Surely wants to hand over this sword to me. Lin Ji put her hand on her mouth and coughed. This is your decision, right? Lin Ji looked at Joseph and raised his hand and asked. This is your inheritance, right? Don't you think more? Joseph's lips moved and said, I'm sure. Joseph raised his hand and explained. I can't help myself, even if I pass the inheritance. I no longer have the right to inherit it. I should learn to let go. This sword is too heavy. Not something I can endure. Joseph's smile reflected on the sword, you can accept it. We are extremely grateful. Lin Ji thought as she held her hands on the table, look at this, it's a family that is going downhill. After all, now that Arizona is no longer at war, other nobles are also in decline. Let alone the military family of the hereditary generation like Joseph. Lin Ji cupped her chin, thinking, if you want to continue living, there must be another way out. Lin Ji moved his lips and smiled, maybe he found a new way out later. That's why his attitude was resolute like that. But giving this gift is still too polite. Clearly I just brought them father and son before. Lin Ji shyly thought to herself, I'm really sorry. Although this sword is very precious. Precious but good or bad is also a person's mind. Lin Ji held the sword and thought, no way. I should still accept it. Lin Ji smiled and said, there's no need to be so polite. Mr. Joseph, helping customers is my consistent hobby. Being able to help you makes me very happy. Lin Ji added in her heart, yeah. It feels a lot lighter than I imagined. Lin Ji looked at the sword and thought, looks like this is indeed a ceremonial sword. Lin Ji looked, the sword is quite satisfying, as expected of a noble's technological product. At the same time, it possesses such complex jewelry yet is still so light in weight. This type of technology is truly worthy of holding and examining. Meticulous. Lin Ji held the sword and swung it a few times. Joseph over here looked at Lin Ji swinging the sword with 3 points. Joseph's eyes widened and thought, should I say that he is worthy of being the owner of the bookstore? Should I be surprised? That heavy magic sword being swung around with such ease and without using any ether. Not even I can pull that off. Looked at Lin Ji touching the sword like a toy. Joseph trembled endlessly. Laughing he forced himself to think. It looks similar in length to a normal sword. But in reality, the materials of this sword are all taken from the dream world. Could it be that the bookstore owner's power is related to the dream world? ? And Lin Ji on this side raised the sword to look at it and thought. It's so beautiful. This sword as a whole is so beautiful and beautiful. It can be seen that the artistic composition is very high. And it's all about romance and fighting. Want to bring in the blood of men. Lin Ji was very satisfied. Smiling happily in her heart. Lin Ji held the sword with a bright smile. And Joseph on this side was scared. His mechanical hand trembled. I want the pin to fall out. Lin Ji smiled and said to Joseph, thank you for your gift. Sir Joseph, I really like this sword. Lin Ji looked at the sword with a smile that couldn't be seen. There was a light of truth behind him and said, do you mind if I take it out and see? Joseph was violently shocked when he heard those words. His eyes widened, his teeth clenched, thinking, it seems that the bookstore owner has noticed the curse of the magic sword. The most important part is focusing on the elven king Candela, who was infected by the plague and became mad. Ultimately committed suicide with the sword. This sword is like a nail. Stabbing Candela to death also imprisoned his soul forever. I took up the sword. At a time when the ancient kingdom still had elves, King Candela in the legend was an existence capable of competing with gods. Not at the level of gods but at the level of gods. In ancient civilizations that gradually declined and died, a similar passage was recorded. King Candela commanded lions and hawks. Thousands of people supported him. He commanded controlling light and fire is like controlling the sun to break through and block the upstream. Throwing out the god who brings lightless night. He is a retrograde person who rises in the dark age. Is the only person who dared to challenge that infamous god. Unfortunately ended up failing, but the only power he left behind was naturally so powerful. Candela's resentment and soul turned into cursed seals. Even the intelligent level couldn't do anything. Anyone who came into contact with the demon's sword would be cursed. Like this pestilence, even if it was large. The brilliant knight who was strictly trained by the secret puppet tower eventually found it difficult to escape. In fact, the current sword sheath was later put on by the secret puppet tower to effectively suppress the spread of spells. The spell will gnaw at the person who first wields the sword. If the will is not strong enough, he can go crazy on the spot. It's a long story in history. Joseph glared at Lynn, silently intending to draw his sword. Thought, but now this person is the owner of the bookstore after all. Joseph looked at Lynn and said, if you want to see of course you can. But be careful. Lynn hugged the sword and rubbed it. I thought to myself. Of course I have to be careful. In case I get hurt. It won't be good. At first, I knew this old man's back was right when I first looked at him. I wasn't mistaken. Lynn slowly pulled out the sword. The drawn sword emitted a beam of white light. Lynn was suddenly bewildered and his mouth opened wide thinking. This sword is like a stream of white flames pouring out. The bookstore seems to be illuminated. The light of the sword enveloped Lynn. Lynn thought, this long sword is like thin but sharp glass radiating a dazzling light. Lynn was bewildered. Her mouth opened wide, silently thinking, it's really so beautiful. And in Joseph's eyes, standing there, he trembled non-stop because there was a dark purple aura hovering. Joseph thought to himself, not good. Here it comes. Evil magical energy is erupting like poison. Looking at the black and purple gas streams were rushing out. Joseph was startled and thought. It's true that the cursed demon sword materialized. And Lynn on this side did not see that purple aura. He was still touching the sword's body to evaluate. That purple-black aura surrounded the sword. Joseph thought to himself, first they nibble. That purple-black aura slowly grew like a tentacle, then turned into a snake's mouth, followed by countless small snakes rushing to bite Lynn. Joseph thought, it's the bookstore owner holding the magic sword. While Lynn still didn't know anything. He was staring at the sword thinking, the text engraved on this sword seems to be in an unknown language somewhere lost in the Arizona mainland. This is truly a rare opportunity. I can't wait to take a closer look. That black and purple aura rushed towards Lynn but Lynn was still busy studying the words. Even the rose and the monster statue were affected and could not move. The rose and the monster statue, the animals glanced at each other but couldn't do anything. The rose drooped down. Joseph also stood still, unable to move, thinking to himself, not good. The owner of the bookstore hasn't made any move yet. And that energy is already there. Is it about to roll up and about to strike? No, the bookstore owner certainly has his plans. But this, Joseph thought to himself, I swear even if the fighting spirit is the most dangerous stimulation of my life. Almost broke the skull of that old bastard who had never experienced such unstable emotions. Joseph thought with a bit of fear, this is indeed more exciting than the feeling of holding the ether kill button and pressing it. Crystal cell. In this small bookstore I'm about to have the illusion of seeing a war between gods and gods that has lasted thousands of years. Bookstore owner, what are you planning to do? Suddenly, Joseph's whole body seemed to have a huge shadow surrounding him, making him a little scared and his eyes widened. At that moment, Joseph really saw something that cannot be named. Somehow, I only saw right in front of Joseph's eyes a dark purple figure flashing with countless swaying skulls. And an eye falling down. Not knowing it was someone's eyeball. Joseph couldn't move, a little scared. The monster was like a tree branch sprouting countless eyes. Moving like a tumor, even though Joseph couldn't understand what was moving in the shadow that night. But the fierce warnings of instinct and reason also made him feel cold to the bone. The black shadow had a red light attached to it. It was like the eye of a light bulb looking at the world, and then the red shadow. That's like a burning fire. The black shadow is rushing towards Lin Ji. It covers Lin Ji from behind. If Lin Ji sees it, it can be called inky. It begins to crawl slowly on Lin Ji's neck, touching his face. Countless eyes growing on that thread of black gas were slowly touching the red ruby on the sword. The snake created by the sword's purple-black gas suddenly startled. Its tongue stretched out but could not move. Its image seemed to blur. The snake that was creating black and purple gas couldn't help but step back. Other snakes were surrounding Joseph. He couldn't move either. Right before Joseph's bewildered eyes, the snake made of aura suddenly flowed out. Joseph's eyes widened with blood as the image of the snake made of purple-black gas suddenly disappeared as if nothing had happened. Joseph looked at the purple-black aura slowly disappearing in midair. His eyes widened and he thought to himself, "Holy light, I saw something. Maybe evil, greedy, murderous magic energy. It seems there is something inside." It looked like a dying series of fear and panic. The things called fear in the pearl of the sword slowly slithered away. Joseph thought of the murderer. If he must be punished, it's like a terrorist hunter being grabbed by a crazy murderer. A strong desire to live while being dragged and about to be killed, causing the poor victim to smash the glass door over and over again. This secret room door is in such a miserable condition that people can hear the soundless screams and screams that they use ether to emit. Hateful, and I feel that these curses are a bit pitiful. That ruby filled with curses had a black and purple aura that wanted to escape but instead fell onto the sword. Lin Ji stared at the sword and thought to herself, "Why do I feel like the underneath of the sword is turning black? Some parts." Lin Ji narrowed one eye and looked at the sword carefully, thinking, "This is probably not an illusion or I'm dizzy. It seems like the sword is a bit dirty." Lin Ji raised the sword thinking, "I don't have anything suitable to wipe at hand. Try it." So Lin Ji raised her sword and waved it a few times. The black and purple aura fell on the sword and fell to the ground. The black and purple aura fell slowly in midair and then gradually descended into the darkness below the ground. Before the purple-black air had time to touch the ground, there was an extremely large mouth underneath the ground, with sharp teeth. It opened its mouth and waited for the purple air to fall in. Then the black air flowed in, swallowing the purple-black stream. Lin Ji didn't know anything. He was still looking at the sword and thinking, I feel like the sword's body is shining again, as if adding a special layer of brilliant light. So, it seems it's not dirty. It's just a special type of technology." Lin Ji grinned and thought, "Interesting, Sir Joseph. This sword of yours is so interesting. I thought it was dirty. I didn't expect it to be just a part of technology." In Joseph's mind, it seemed like there were tens of thousands of dots passing through his head. Joseph's eyes were filled with fear as he looked at Lin Ji and thought, "This is the curse that causes it was so difficult that the tower had sacrificed countless great knights for so long and could not do anything about it. Just like that, and disappeared in an instant." The bookstore owner even thought that this dirty curse was part of the curse of technology. Joseph's sweat fell and thought to himself, "Does that mean it's only worthy for him to play with a little?" And over here, Lin Ji smiled and closed her eyes and said, "I don't have anything else as a gift to repay." Lin Ji raised her hand and said, "Is there any book you want to see? I can give it to you. I'll give you a free book. Want to try and choose for yourself?" When Lin Ji said that, there was a dark shadow with two eyes staring at Joseph. Joseph was a little scared and sweat fell all over his body and said, "No. Thank you." Joseph raised a finger and said, "Thank you very much for your good intentions. Could you please recommend me a book?"